Good morning. Good morning. It is Monday, April 29th, and we are going to be joining court for the beginning of the Commonwealth versus Karen Read. That is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Karen Read. She is accused of killing her boyfriend, Officer John O'Keefe, with her vehicle. The state did not originally charge this as a volitional or intentional homicide. This was originally charged as an accident. This morning, we are getting into opening statements. The court will likely give jury instructions before that, reminding everyone to keep an open mind. Listen to the jury instructions. We will be watching this case, also keeping an open mind. They have moved this to a much smaller courthouse or a much smaller courtroom within the courthouse, and that's going to be very interesting to see. But there is a jury instruction that says, do not state your opinion too fervently, too powerfully, or too early in the model jury instructions. That's a summation of it. But I am here to keep an open mind and watch this trial unfold. I hope you are too. We will see what opening statements are from the state and the defense, both, well, the Commonwealth. I'm going to use those synonymously because I practiced in a jurisdiction where the state was the state, not the Commonwealth, but you know, it is what it is. So we will see opening statements, about 45 minutes from each side. Each side indicated that that was plenty of time for them. So we are going to zoom the opening, go to court. Law nerds, we're back for trial. It's good to see you. I spent a lot of this weekend getting a whole reset up. So if you're ready to go into this as a juror and see the evidence be presented to you in court, keep an open mind. Remember, the job of the state is to convince you during their state. The job of the defense is to poke holes in that case through cross-examination and through their own case. So you guys, there's only one thing to do.
Bring the jury.
And roll the opening. Let's go. Tell me where you're coming in from, what you're drinking. I hope you had a good weekend. Let's roll.
Hey there, I'm Emily D. Baker, the internet's go-to legal analyst, breaking down the legal side of the pop culture and entertainment stories we can't stop talking about. I'm a big fan of the cursey words. I've been a licensed attorney for over 17 years, but this is not legal advice. This is where the law nerds unite to talk about facts, not... Let's get into it.
Did I have my intro muted? I sure did. Do I wish we had a feed without a lower crawl? I sure did. We will see. So there is no audio from the court feed. They had called the court to order, but there is no audio from court. So we will just wait and see what happens with all of that. Oh, you guys heard the intro. I had it muted. With all of that, we're going to keep this court feed up until we have some audio from court. We're going to go over the indictment once again because I think that it is helpful. I'm not going to pull it up on screen, and then we will answer some questions before they get to whatever they're arguing about in court. Remember, they did switch to that smaller courtroom. It is an early morning. It is good to see so many of you. What I didn't say as we were getting rolling is that with all of the chat about this case, all of the chat on the internet about this case, I am so happy to see the law nerds going into this with, I want to see them present the evidence, convince me, or convince me one way or the other. I think that it's really important, even if you know a lot about this case, to go into it taking a look at what the state is going to present, what the defense is going to present in evidence, not in arguments, not in motions. I firmly believe that everyone in this community deserves answers, and everyone deserves to see this trial play out. It has been incredibly dividing within the local community. I've seen that on the internet as well. It is really important that all of them get answers. Look, Officer O'Keefe's family deserves answers. Karen Read and her family deserve answers. This is a case where at the outset, there's a lot of questions. I saw some of you asking if she's in custody. No, she is not. Remember, this was originally charged as a DUI-related homicide, more of an accidental homicide. And then as the state investigated more, they upgraded it. I mean, that's a weird way to say it. I don't have a better way to say it this morning. It's real early. But they enhanced the charges to be a second-degree murder, which is a volitional or intentional homicide versus an accidental homicide. So she was indicted a second time on the second degree murder, not first degree, not a premeditated, but a volitional action, second degree murder, a driving under the influence causing death, a hit and run where serious injury or death occurred. Those are the three charges that the state is trying to prove. Is the state overreaching here? I don't know. Is it possible that the state is overreaching here? Sure. A lot of the cases that we've gone into, except maybe like Depp v. Heard, we went in going like, well, this is going to be interesting because it was a civil case. It was a defamation. Defamation's hard to prove. Defamation's especially hard to prove when you're talking about celebrities. It is not easy to prove defamation of a public figure. So we went into that going, I don't know how they're going to do this. Let's see. In Murdaugh, it was like, well, this man did all those financial crimes, but about the murder, I don't know. Let's see what the evidence shakes out. In Shabiznes, as we got into the defense case of the Taylor Shabiznes trial, you're looking at the Taylor Shabiznes trial and you know that she did it. Like she did it. You know that she did it. There's no question that she did it. It's whether she was in her right mind when she did it and can be held responsible for it. Same with Darrell Brooks. We went into that criminal trial looking at it going, well, we know he did it. We know he did it, but how is this going to play out? He's representing himself. This is not that case, right? Mystic Moss made a great point and said, my mind changed in Paltrow. The Gwyneth Paltrow civil ski crash trial, a lot of people went in and were like, Gwyneth kind of hit that dude and she kind of sucks. And then by the end of it, people were like, wait a second here. That's not at all what happened. That's not at all what happened. So I am really interested to see this trial play out. I saw some of you asking if I will be streaming every day of trial. That is my intention, but as we get later into June, there are some questions. As we get later into June, my schedule is going to get a little, so we will see, but it is my goal to do this every single day. For those of you asking if that was Judge Newman at the end of Quick Bits.
Bring the jury.
Yes, it was. Did I spend the entire weekend redoing my office setup so that I could have a new third screen, which is over to this side. So if you see me looking this way, that's where my third monitor is. And I redid my whole audio setup.
The FBI!
Look, the amount of time I'm going to be using this audio drop, especially in this case. Why? Because there is also a federal investigation into this case, and that is going to be a very interesting aspect. The court has ruled and the parties have agreed that they are not going to mention the federal investigation, but it's going to come up. Like, we're going to know what it's coming up. We're going to know what's coming up, right? Because the FBI. I can't help it. Because some of the some of the accident reconstructionists were from the federal investigation. So with the federal investigation, we're going to see some of those witnesses come in probably during the defense case. So yes, the FBI drop is from Kevin and Bean, but yes, it's from that darn cat, but it's from, in my soul, it is from Kevin and Bean. And I cannot hear, because I spent my childhood growing up on Kevin and Bean on morning radio in Los Angeles. I cannot say the words the FBI without hearing that in my head. So you're going to share that joy with me. I'm going to answer questions until court gets underway. Court is always going to be, this a little bit slow, but I saw Stripes and Nap said, did I add not today, Judge? No, but I'm putting it on my list to do this afternoon. I will absolutely add not today, Judge. I saw another question I was going to answer. Did I read that correctly? Oh, Miguelina, make a list. We're adding that too. There's room on the Roadcaster. We're doing that too. I also added, what else did I add? Oh, I added the gavel, and I needed this when the cats stole my goat. So we're ready. Like, it's a full morning radio show giving legal commentary up in here. So for those in the chat asking, have we started yet? I mean, they're in court. They're all standing up. We don't have audio from court. Oh no, don't go to the fan. Is there not a clock? Is there not a clock? Gosh darn it. The cats, Smurf Anna, sometimes the cats knock the sound effects off of the desk. They are very happily curled up on my desk this morning. I hate the fan. I hate the fan so much. I guess there's not a clock in this courtroom. The last courtroom had a glorious clock. So why did they agree not to mention the FBI? There's no relevant purpose to bring up the federal investigation, the fact that there is a federal investigation, but the tenets of that investigation are going to come up, right? If the defense asks an expert, did we hire you? And the expert's like, no. Okay, well, did the state hire you or the Commonwealth hire you? No. It's going to be just kind of hanging there. Who hired you? Can I make this smaller? Let's see if I can. I'm going to have to make the court a little bit smaller while the fan is just rolling because I cannot with that. Thank you, Streamyard, for letting letting me change my screen on the fly. So we're gonna keep it down in the lower third, but it's just like my loneliness. Just kidding, Brittany. It's killing me. So that is going to be the worst. The cats also hate it. They're looking at the screen like, what? I thought I saved that layout and then it disappeared. There we go. So that's both parties agreed to quite a lot. What's really interesting is that both parties also agreed that they weren't going to mention any witness intimidation. They weren't going to discuss any witness intimidation. And then the court was like, yeah, I don't necessarily agree. Like if it comes up, I'm not going to stop a witness from talking about it if the witness organically mentions it. So the court has disagreed where the parties have agreed. Question from the chat. Is this a jurisdiction where the juries get to ask questions? I don't know. We're going to find out together. I don't know. I feel like we need your mic, Miss Bretta Hoft. We might. Question, Emily, so they could use the same witnesses as the federal investigation, but not say that they're from the federal investigation. Carolyn, yes, because they're not going to open the door into being like, and isn't this being investigated? But they can use witnesses that were produced at the federal grand jury or hired as part of the federal investigation. Those reports are available. The witnesses that testified at the Commonwealth grand jury are also going to be witnesses that testify here. So that's going to be really, really interesting. All right. I'm going to see if there is another feed real quick. So let me take this down. Okay, that's Miguelina, that's good to know. Let me see. We're going to see if there's another feed real quick. I feel like I'm Ryan Hall, y'all, with all my monitors. He's got like 8+. But I've got multiples now and I'm like, haha. So let me see. Oh, okay. Well, this feed, just the NBC 10 Boston 10 feed doesn't have a lower third, which is helpful. So we'll pull that one up. It's also just on the fan. But for those of you that watch Ryan Hall, y'all, I know some of you saw me in the chat. I had his stream running while I was getting my new setup set up, and it was great because I could have his chat up where I put my chat and kind of experiment with it. There were such just awful and dangerous tornado outbreaks this weekend, but as I just rave about another YouTuber real quick, I love that Ryan brings education, information, helps people understand what's coming their way, encourages people to get to safety, empowers people to be, prepared, not scared, which is one of his tags. He's just absolutely an incredible creator.
Parties having anything to do before the Honorable First Justice Beverly Canoni, now sitting in the Norfolk Superior Court within and for the County of Norfolk. Draw near, give your attendance, you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth and this good court. Thank you. May be seated, court now.
I have never heard God save the Commonwealth. That's a first for us. God save the Commonwealth. If you wonder how closely connected the original colonies are to England, God save the Commonwealth is going to get you there. But the Boston accent.
Stand one more time and raise your right hands.
10-10, they're swearing in the jury.
Do each of you solemnly swear you shall well and truly try the issue between the Commonwealth and the defendant according to your evidence and according to the law, so help you God? You can have a seat. Jurors, hearken to these indictments. 2282 CR 117001, Karen Reed of Mansfield in the county of Bristol, on or about January 29, 2022. At
They're
Canton
reading
in
the
county of
indictment
Norfolk.
to the jury. They've just
Did
been
assault and
sworn.
beat John O'Keefe with intent to murder such person, and
They
by
didn't
such
show the
assault and
jury.
battery did kill and murder the said John O'Keefe, and is guilty of murder in the second degree and not in the first degree,
This
in
is the
violation of
indictment we
General
just
Law,
went
Chapter
over.
265, Section 1.
And that I covered in the
002,
podcast.
Karen Reed of Mansfield, county of Bristol, on or about January 29, 2022.
This will be
at
the court
Canton in
clerk.
the county of Norfolk. Did operate a motor vehicle upon a way as defined in Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 90, Section 1, or in a place to which the public has a right of access, or upon a way or in a place to which members of the public have access as invitees or licensees, with a percentage by weight of alcohol in their blood of 8/100ths or greater, or while under the influence of intoxicating liquor, and did so operate said motor vehicles that the lives and safety of the public might be endangered. And by such wanton and reckless conduct so described,
With the
did
with the
cause the death
Boston
of another
accent.
person, to wit, John O'Keefe, in violation
I
of
love
General
it.
Law,
I'm here
Chapter
for all of it.
265, Section 13.5. 003, Karen Reed of Mansfield in the county of Bristol, on or about January 29, 2022, at Canton in the county of Norfolk, did operate a motor vehicle upon a way or in a place to which the public has a right of access, or upon a way or in a place to which members of the public have access as invitees or licensees.
He's
and
on
without
2x
stopping and
speed
making
on
known
his
her
own.
name, residence, and registration number of her motor vehicle, did go away to avoid prosecution or evade
Oh, sorry,
apprehension
Brits.
after knowingly colliding with or otherwise causing injury to John O'Keefe.
My brain hasn't
Such
switched from God
injuries
Save the
having
Queen yet.
resulted in the death of
Apologies.
said person in violation
No
of,
shade
in violation
intended,
of
just
General Law,
a
Chapter 90,
lifetime of
Section 24,
God Save the Queen.
A.5, 2.
And references to
To these indictments, the
Punk
defendant
music.
has pled that she is not guilty and for trial has put herself upon the country, which country you are, and you are sworn to try the issue.
Put
If
herself
she is guilty, you are to
upon the
say so.
country.
If she is not guilty, you will say so and no more. Jurors, hearken to the evidence.
Thank you very much. Will counsel identify yourselves, please?
jurors.
Starting with the Commonwealth.
Hearken the evidence.
Adam Lally for the Commonwealth. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Mr. Lally. Good
Morning, Your Honor. Laura McLaughlin for the Commonwealth.
morning, Ms. McLaughlin.
Good morning, Your Honor. Alan Jackson on behalf of Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Mr. Jackson.
Good morning, Your Honor. Elizabeth Little, also on behalf of Ms. Reed.
Good morning, Ms. Little.
The defense
Good
team.
morning, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is David Yannetti, and I represent Karen Reed.
Best
Good morning,
intro.
Ms. Giannetti. Good morning, Ms. Reed. All right. Good morning. Good morning, jurors. Before we begin, I have to ask
What?
you 3 questions that I'm going to ask you
No.
every single time we meet.
No.
The first question is, were you all able to follow my instructions and refrain from
Nope. Veto. Immediate veto. Immediate veto.
from doing any independent research or investigation into this case? Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively. Did anyone happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case since we were last in court?
Immediately no.
Everyone said no
Immediately
or
no.
shook their
Thank you,
heads.
Miguelina.
Thank you. All right, jurors, I'm about to make some preliminary remarks to you to
These are the
acquaint you with
opening
some
jury
of the legal
instructions. I'm gonna
principles,
switch feeds one
procedure,
more time,
and
'cause
terminology
the
that
lower
you'll
third
hear
scroll
about during the course of the trial.
Makes me nauseous.
But these comments are not intended to be a substitute for the more detailed instructions on the law, which I will give you at the conclusion of the
All right.
case.
Last time.
Is the trial of a criminal case, as you've
One
heard.
more
and
time
you've
with
heard that the
feeling.
defendant is charged with second-degree murder. She's also charged with manslaughter while operating on personal injury or death. I will describe in
It's the
detail
indictment
at the
again.
end of the case each of these
Oh, but no closed
indictments
captioning.
when I teach you the law. But briefly, murder is
So
the
you guys are
unlawful
gonna have to
killing of a
CC
human
on your
being.
own feed.
In order to prove the defendant guilty of second-degree murder, the Commonwealth must prove
Yeah, the
beyond a
audio's way better.
reasonable doubt that the defendant committed an unlawful killing and that it was done with malice. In comparison, manslaughter while operating under the influence is an unintentional,
zoom in on the defendant this
unlawful
whole trial, I'm
killing
gonna lose my
caused
mind
by
in, like,
wanton or
2
reckless
hours.
conduct while under the
I wanna see
influence
who's
of
talking.
intoxicating liquor. liquor. Again,
Show me
these
the
terms
judge.
and elements of the crimes, including the additional crime of leaving the scene of an accident after causing personal injury
They're
or death,
rereading the
will be
indictment.
described for you in detail
G,
at the
they're
end of the
estimating
case.
6 to 8 weeks.
Please remember
But not
that
every
the
day,
defendant
and
starts this
short days.
trial presumed to be innocent. The fact that she was arrested or that she was indicted is not proof of anything. An indictment is just a piece of paper. It just makes an accusation. So it's merely a formal manner of accusing
This
a
courtroom
person
is
of a crime
claustrophobic. It's very
to
small.
bring her to trial in the Superior Court. But it is only the jury, in other words, you folks, who can decide whether the prosecution has proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. If the Commonwealth does not do that, then the presumption of innocence alone requires you to find the defendant not guilty.
Yeah.
The law does not require a defendant to prove her innocence, to produce any evidence whatsoever,
They can
or to
do
do anything
nothing.
other than attend the trial.
Yep, they don't have to
This
cross-examine.
presumption of innocence remains with the defendant
they do.
until you, the jury, make your determination after listening and considering all the evidence. What is proof beyond a reasonable doubt? The term is often used and probably pretty well
They're
understood,
going
though
to
it
hear
is
these
not
instructions again
easily
at the close,
defined.
but these are the
Proof
opening jury
beyond a
instructions before
reasonable
opening
doubt does not mean
statements.
proof beyond all possible doubt. For everything in the lives of human beings is open to some possible or imaginary doubt. A charge is proved beyond a reasonable doubt
The charge.
if, after you
I
have
love it. I
compared
fucking love
and
it so much.
considered all of the evidence, you have in your minds an abiding conviction to a moral certainty that the charge is true. When we refer to moral certainty, we mean the highest degree of certainty possible in matters relating to human affairs, based solely on the evidence that has been put before you in this case. I have told you that every person is presumed to be innocent until he or she is proved guilty, and that the burden of proof is on the prosecutor. If you evaluate all the evidence and you still have a reasonable doubt remaining, the defendant is entitled to the benefit of that doubt and must be acquitted. It is not enough for the Commonwealth to establish a probability, even a strong probability, that the defendant is more likely to be guilty than not guilty. That is not enough. Instead, the evidence
more
must
likely than
convince
not's
you
not
of the
gonna cut it.
defendant's guilt to a reasonable and moral certainty, a certainty that convinces
Not
your
every jurisdiction
understanding
says moral
and
certainty.
satisfies your reason and judgment as jurors who are sworn to act conscientiously on the evidence. That is what we mean by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, our system of justice depends on judges like me and jurors like you being able and willing to make careful and fair decisions. All people deserve fair and equal treatment in our system of justice, regardless of their race, national origin, religion, age,
These go to
ability,
bias.
gender, sexual orientation, education, income level, or any other personal characteristic. You have agreed to be fair, and I'm sure you want to be fair, but that is not always easy. One difficulty comes from our own built-in expectations and assumptions. They exist even if we're not aware of them, and even if we believe we do not have them. Some of you may have heard this called implicit bias, and that is what I'm talking about. Of course, we judges have the same problem as everyone else, so let me share a
We're
few
human.
strategies that we have found useful.
Sorry, that wasn't me
First,
stepping on a cat.
Slow down.
My
Do not rush to a decision. Hasty
Footstool
decisions are more
moved.
likely to reflect stereotypes or
Hey,
hidden biases.
I say slow down
Second,
all the time.
Keep an open mind.
Look at us.
Avoid drawing conclusions until the end of the case when you and your fellow jurors
Honor,
deliberate.
I said that too.
Remember that when you deliberate, you will have
Talking about this
all
during
the
instruction,
evidence
but, you know.
and all the time you need to make a careful decision. So there truly is no need to start making up your mind before then.
I was quoting the jury instructions, to be fair.
You should listen closely to all the witnesses. That is the best way to ensure that you decide this case based on the evidence and the law
So much easier
instead
said
of
than done
upon
over 8 weeks.
unsupported assumptions. Fourth, as you listen to the testimony about the people involved in this case, consider them as individuals rather than as members of a particular group.
Treat people as people.
Finally, I might ask myself, would I view the evidence differently if the people were from different groups, such as different racial, ethnic, or gender identity groups?
At the end of the case, I will remind you of these strategies and ask you to focus on
Chad,
the
I love that
evidence
you're like the
instead of
judges
any
listening to. No,
unsupported
I just-
assumptions you may have.
I just did a lot of
All
trials.
we ask
I know these jury
is that
instructions
you,
well.
individually and as a group, do your best to resolve this case based upon the evidence
And they're
in the
written to
law
try to help people
without
understand how to
sympathy,
keep an open
bias,
mind.
or prejudice, to the best of your ability as human beings. Now, when I finish with these initial instructions, Mr.
Opening
Lally will make his
arguments.
opening statement. Mr.
Statements.
Yannetti can choose to make an opening statement or not, because the defendant has no burden of proof and doesn't have to prove anything. Her lawyer doesn't even need to make an opening
The
statement.
defense can also reserve
An
their
opening
opening. They're not
statement
going
is
to
a
do that, but
summary
they
of what
could
the
do it
lawyer
later.
expects the evidence
They're
at
not going
trial
to.
will be.
They have
It
that
is
option.
intended to introduce the main issues in the case. Next, the prosecution will introduce evidence in support of the charges in the indictments.
We'll start with
After
witnesses.
that, the defendant may present evidence on her behalf if she wishes to do so, but again, she is not obligated to do so. Remember, the burden of proof is always on the Commonwealth to prove that the defendant is guilty. The law does not require any defendant to prove her innocence or to produce any evidence at all. After all the evidence, each side will have an opportunity to offer you closing arguments about what conclusions you might draw from the evidence. Like the opening statements, the closing arguments are not evidence. They're merely intended to help you understand the respective contentions of the parties. Finally, after all the evidence and the lawyer's arguments, I will instruct you in detail on the principles of law which you are to apply in your deliberations when you retire to consider your verdict. Your verdict must be unanimous. You see that we have many of you. We have 17 of you, and only 12 will ultimately
sat
decide this
17
case.
with alternates.
And that's done at the end of the case. We impanel so many jurors in a case that's going to take a long time in case something comes up and a juror
Something will
can't
come up.
complete his or her service.
Something will come up.
Let me talk
It's a long
briefly about
case.
our respective
But they're not
roles
gonna
in
go
this
every
case.
day.
As the judge, my responsibility is to see to it
Can you
that
just
this
like game
case is
forward? We don't need
tried
to see him typing.
in an
Can we
orderly,
just
fair, and
shift
efficient
the camera
manner.
just
It's also my function
the
to decide
judge?
any questions of law that come up during the
Can we
trial
stop just
and
focusing
to
only
instruct
on
you
the
about the law
defendant?
that applies to this case. It is your duty to accept the law as I stated to you,
Like, just-
whether you agree with it or not.
Seriously.
The jury's function.
I'm gonna be messing
you
with my
folks
lab
are
the
the
whole
most
time.
important people in this courtroom.
You folks.
You determine the facts of this case.
Your Honor,
You
the
are the
law
sole
nerd.
and exclusive
The law nerds are the
judges
most
of the
important-
facts.
most
You
important
alone
internet
determine what evidence
jury
to
that
believe,
exists.
how important any evidence is that you do believe, and what conclusions all the believable evidence
Danielle, I
leads
don't
you
know.
to.
It's a small
You will
courtroom. It
have
looks
to
like it's
consider and
set up with
weigh
a judge in a
the
corner,
testimony of all
but
the
I'm not-
witnesses
nope,
who will
she's
appear
straight in the
before
back.
you, and you alone will determine whether to believe any
The
witness
state is at the
and
table
extent to
right
which
up
you
against the
believe
court
any
clerks, which is
witness.
strange
You can
to me.
believe
It
all of
looks-
what a witness says, some of it,
So you've got the
or none of
judge,
it. It's entirely
you got the judge, you've got the court reporter and the judge's research assistants, judicial assistants, clerks. Then you've got the prosecutors. See those big exhibity binders? That's the prosecutor's table. Behind that is the defense table. It's so weird to me because in California, you sat like all in a line, and most courtrooms you do. So you can see the defense table, they can see you. But the prosecution is sitting right up there against the bench, and the defense is behind them. The court reporter is doing oral stenography. So that is the steno machine being held up to do the stenography in the
you.
case. I'm going to put
It
this
is
up at
part of your
1.25 while she's
responsibility
doing.
to resolve any
Nope, not
conflicts
that.
in the testimony that may arise during the course of the
Speed.
trial and to determine where the truth lies. Ultimately, you must determine whether or not the Commonwealth has proved
So
the
it's just a
charges
weird
beyond
setup.
a reasonable doubt.
And then the jury's to the
the
side.
lawyers have their own important role in this trial.
You can see the
They
corner
are, of
of
course,
the jury
advocates.
box.
Their job is to bring to your
This is the
attention the
corner of the
evidence
jury
and
box.
arguments that best support their position.
I sped
They
her
may
up a
also
little.
object to evidence offered by the other side that may not be admissible under our rules of evidence. Similarly, we may engage in sidebar conferences over here out of your hearing. They're not
This
intended
courtroom
to
is
keep
very,
secrets from you,
very
but
small.
to allow the lawyers a little more time to argue their points so that I can rule on what you may
Last
consider
night,
as
Vinnie
evidence.
Politan was talking about
If I agree with an
how
objection to a
small
question
this
during
courtroom
trial, I will
is, and
use
that
the
people are
term
just
sustained.
packed on top
You
of
are
each
then
other.
to disregard that question, and you're not to speculate as to what the answer might have been. In the
So,
same way, you were to
it's a very
disregard
small
any
courtroom,
evidence that I
and
tell
there's
you
not
is
a lot of
stricken
room
from
for
the
media,
record.
and there's not
If
a
I
lot of room for the
reject or
community.
overrule an objection,
So I imagine
will
a lot of
allow
the
the
community
witness to
will-
answer the question,
will be
and you may
watching
consider
here.
that answer. But you're not to give that answer any more weight than you would have had no objection been
Why
made.
isn't this?
Please do
No.
not hold it against the lawyers if they
begin.
make an
There we go.
objection. That's part of the lawyer's job. The lawyers have to let me know when there's a potential issue about the
Look at this
admissibility
glorious
of
court
certain
feed.
evidence of law under our laws. You must decide this case solely in the evidence presented in the courtroom, and this will include the sworn testimony of witnesses and may also include exhibits that are admitted into evidence.
I don't know.
Any facts which I tell you may have been
Anna,
agreed upon by both
gonna be a
sides,
mess.
and any facts which I
There's no
indicate to
room
you
for
that you may
sidebars.
take as a matter of common knowledge. Question to witnesses, no matter how artfully phrased, are not evidence. Only the answers that you receive from the witnesses who are testifying under oath
Yeah, we're all
are evidence.
we're all from
If one
Boston
of
by
the
the end of
lawyers
this
or I
trial.
refer to some part of the evidence that does not coincide
We're all
with
going to
your
sound
own
like
recollection,
Dorit from
it is
Real
your
Housewives
collective
with
recollection
our own
which you are
hodgepodge
to follow
accents
in your
from all the
deliberations.
trials we've watched.
In this case, I'll allow you folks to take notes. Any jurors who wish to take notes during the course of the trial, except during opening statements and closing arguments, because again, those aren't evidence, we'll
They're
hand
so
out
helpful.
notebooks
I'm gonna be
after the
taking
openings
notes.
this morning so that you can take notes.
I'm going to take notes.
They'll be provided to you daily. Your notebooks will be collected every day. They'll be kept locked up and confidential,
Thank you,
and they're
Carrie.
destroyed at the end of the trial. You're not required to take notes. The choice is completely
Thank you,
up to
K-Rob.
you. Some jurors may feel that notes are helpful,
Thank you, Abba.
particularly if the case involves many witnesses or complicated issues. Notes also can help
Tina,
you to
thank
remember
you for making it
specific
rain
testimony or
memberships
evidence,
today.
such as
It's incredibly
times,
kind.
places, dates, names, relationships, events, distances, things of that nature. Other jurors may feel that note-taking is a distraction and may interfere with hearing and evaluating the evidence. If you do take notes, I suggest you keep them brief. They are not and cannot be considered official transcripts of the trial testimony.
Yeah, you don't need to
However,
rewrite everything.
Bear in mind that although the court reporter is recording everything that transpires here,
Notes
we
help
do
me
not
stay
have the
engaged.
capability of providing you with a transcript of the testimony at the
Those aren't the
conclusion or
jurors.
any time during the trial.
So chat, those aren't the jurors. That's the gallery. This is set up. It feels like, and it probably is, it feels like British Parliament, but that's the gallery to the side of the lawyers, like around the side of the lawyers. And I imagine there's not a lot of room to walk through. I don't know which family is sitting looking at the defense table, but that's literally the gallery. It's wild. I'll look online and see if we can find any pictures of the
You will
of
have
the
to rely
layout,
on
but
your
it's
own memories of the
tight.
testimony, perhaps
There are videos
supplemented
somewhere,
by your
but it's
notes.
really close.
Regardless of whether or not you take notes, remember that
This is an
how
old
a
courthouse
witness
built in the
testifies
1800s.
may be just as important as what he or she says.
Thank you guys for the gifted
Therefore,
memberships.
your observations of the witness's appearance and demeanor on the witness stand may play an important part in your assessment of his or her credibility. So please do not let your note-taking distract you from an appreciation of
Can we
all
watch
the
the
evidence.
judge? I'm going to bitch the entire trial.
Now, I'm going to address the issue of public interest in this case again, and the duty of this court and this jury to adhere to the rule of law because it is so very important. Remember, John Adams said that we are a government of laws, not of men, and that the law must be deaf to the clamoring of...
Quoting John Adams is the most Massachusetts shit ever, and I am fucking living. I'm living. We're like 15 minutes into trial, and I'm here for them quoting John Adams. Let's go. Just let's go.
The public. He meant that while public opinion about a given subject may ebb and flow, the law must be steady, reliable, and even-handed. We know that on the subject of this case, there are people advocating for one outcome or another with intensity, but without the benefit of having...
Wait a second. I'm going to slow this down to real time. We'll zoom in a minute. Oh, we're back at normal. Okay. I can't believe she is talking about there is intense feelings on both sides of this case already. Like, that's wild.
Important part in your assessment of his or her credibility. So please do not let your note-taking distract you from an appreciation of all the evidence. Now, I'm going to address the issue of public interest in this case again.
This is wild.
And the duty of this court and this jury to adhere to the rule of law because it is so very important. Remember, John Adams said that we are a government of laws, not of men, and that the law must be deaf to the clamoring of the public.
It's true.
He meant that while public opinion about a given subject may ebb and flow, the law must be steady, reliable, and even-handed. We know that on the subject of this case, there are people advocating for one outcome or another with intensity, but without the benefit of having heard or seen any evidence at all. The law works in a different way, and the difference is crucial to our system of justice. This jury will decide This jury selected for this trial will
jury.
hear and judge the evidence. You will decide what the facts are, and where the evidence is contested, you will determine where the truth lies. Ultimately, this jury, you folks, will decide whether the Commonwealth has carried its burden of proving that the defendant is guilty of any crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
Interesting.
People outside of this building have rights, and we know that they have voices, but this trial will be decided by you.
I mean,
an independent jury, free from outside interference, based only upon the evidence presented in this courtroom and the law. This is the only way to ensure that every person who comes before the court receives a fair trial. It is just that simple and that important. So, while public comment will likely continue, you must ignore it so that in this courtroom, the rule of law will be.
I'm going to pause this because I realize that we probably have more live concurrent viewers than other networks. We always do. Just a reminder for those of you that are new law nerds and might not be familiar with being here before. We are going into this case as a jury. As a jury, we are not making up our minds until the end of this case. So if anybody pops in and is starting to express opinions one way or the other, don't worry. You will be swiftly yeeted back to where you can go do that on other parts of the internet. But that is just not what we do here. So will the mods be super patient? Maybe today. But after today, will the yeet hammer drop? Yep, sure will. Because the law nerds know.
Upheld.
Just a reminder.
This means that during the trial, until you retire to
all right. We'll make the internet mad with our rules again.
You must not discuss this
like we do
case
every
with
trial.
anyone. This includes family and friends, and even your fellow jurors. Nor should you allow anyone to communicate with you about any aspect of this case.
Tara said, not sure how anyone can make up their minds. So many questions.
You must not conduct any independent research about this case, the matters in this case, the individuals involved in this case. In other words, you must not consult the internet, including social media, and do anything else to find out any information from any source outside the confines of this courtroom. As best as you recognize them, please have no contact with any of the participants in this trial or anyone associated with either side, including the
zoom
lawyers.
to get to opening.
Please do not visit any locations that may be mentioned during the trial. We will go on a view, and I will discuss that with you before we go.
They are doing a jury view
you
of
were
the
instructed that
scene.
you must not.
The
and you
defendant
assured
will
us
not
that
go.
You would not.
That will be
read,
later. There will
watch,
be
or
no
listen to
cameras.
any account of any aspect of this case in any news media or from any other source. It is critical that you follow that instruction, as hard as it's going to be. Finally, please continue to keep
coffee.
an open mind. Now, I know that you will try this case according to the oath that you have taken as jurors. When you took that oath, you promised that you would well and truly try the issues between the Commonwealth and the defendant according to the evidence and the law. If you follow that oath, approach this case with an open mind, and make your decisions fairly and without prejudice, bias, or sympathy for anyone, then you will arrive at a true and just verdict. And that's what we ask of you.
Cindy, I am going to share.
It's time for opening statements, and whenever you're ready,
I'm going to slow this down. I will share that Judge Abby sent me a beverage goblin sticker.
I ask only that you keep your voice up, please.
I'm going to put him in real time until we determine if he's slow or not. If he's a slow speaker.
I was telling you, this is
oh, fuck. There's no.
That I will get
is there not a microphone? I like the tie.
To address you. The first of which right now, essentially what I'm going to attempt to do, and I know you heard over the course of the impoundment process a number of different witnesses that were listed out as far as potential witnesses in this.
This is the prosecution.
Intent here is
opening.
To provide as much of a roadmap as I can through those waters and help you to navigate sort of who these people are and what relation they have to this case.
I'm not compelled or riveted yet.
John O'Keefe grew up in Braintree. He was 46 years old when he passed. He was the son of John O'Keefe Jr. and Margaret or Peggy O'Keefe. He was a brother to Paul O'Keefe and to his sister, Kristen Furbush. Kristen was married, and so John's brother-in-law was a man named Stephen Furbush. And they had 2 children.
Lots of details about
young,
the victim's family.
In 2013. Now, in 2013, Kristen, unfortunately, tragically, passed away.
His sister.
To cancer in November of 2013. Within months of that, Mr. O'Keefe's brother-in-law and Kristen's husband, Stephen, passed away as well. Now, initially, when John O'Keefe's sister passed away...
I'm going to pause this and note real quick. When you see the layout of this courtroom, it is very boxed in. It looks very much more like truly a British like parliament. Behind where the prosecutor is speaking now are family members. There is some court reserved for victim's family, defendant's family, but they'll be looking directly across at the jury. So that normally the jury's to the side and the public is in the back, but you've got the public audience fully vis-a-vis the jury with the parties scrunched in the middle in like a horseshoe. So you've got media sitting back here with a yellow tie. You've got defendant's family sitting there. I'm imagining that this is John O'Keefe's mother in the green, and the jury is sitting right on the other side of that box. It is a very unusual layout, but the jury is going to see everyone in the gallery quite well.
The initial plan for that situation was that...
I mean, Lily,
John
I think
O'Keefe
it's
was going to
inspired
move in
by.
with Stephen Flourbush and the kids and assist.
It's not as big, inspired by.
And then when Stephen passed away a few months after his wife, before those plans could be finalized, John O'Keefe then moved in with his niece and nephew and assumed the parental role and assumed legal guardianship with respect to both of those children. Now, he was assisted in this by a great number of people within the town of Canton where the Florbushes lived and where John moved into, the home with the two children there. There were other parents within the neighborhood, other parents within the children's age group. You'll hear from a number of them over the course of this trial, but they include Mrs. Kerry Roberts and Mrs. Jennifer McKay. They helped Mr. O'Keefe out during those initial stages and during the time that he assumed this role. He also got help from his work. John O'Keefe was a proud member of the Boston Police Department, had been for many years. He had been a patrolman prior to moving in with the children and assuming this sort of role. Boston Police Department helped him greatly as far as transitioning him to more of a desk role, working in the sex offender unit with more regular hours to sort of assimilate himself to this new life and this new role that he assumed with these children. Initially, John O'Keefe lived in the house with the kids. However, in 2018, they moved into a new home, sort of a new home that they could have as their own. That home is located also within the town of Canton, sort of on the Stoughton side of Canton at One Meadows Avenue. John O'Keefe raised these children, assuming guardianship for them.
His niece
for
and
about 8
nephew
years.
are going to be key witnesses here.
Niece, who was the elder of the two, was about 14 at the time that John O'Keefe died, and his nephew was about 11 years old at the time that John O'Keefe died.
The
January
kids in this
28th,
break my heart.
It was a relatively typical day. It was a Friday going into a Saturday of January 29th.
Fridays do that.
Sort of typical in the sense of most sort of suburban parents. There were a lot of activities, weekend sports, practices, games, things of that nature that the O'Keefe and Furbush family had to look forward to. One little difference when it came to that particular day of January 28th and the 29th is the weather. So there had been predicted, and there was going to be a snowstorm, an insignificant one. A blizzard essentially was coming in overnight that Friday into Saturday, lasting through most of the day on Saturday the 29th. And as a result of that, most of those sort of typical, weekend routine activities that would keep most people, including those within the town of Canton, busy, have been canceled ahead of time. Everybody knew what was coming. Everybody knew essentially you weren't going to leave your house all that much the following day. Now, also on January 28th, Mr. O'Keefe had received some news in respect to his niece. So his niece and her best friend were in 8th grade at the time, going into high school in the fall of 2022. They both applied to...
I just have to point out again, because it is the thing about this case that was so shocking to me when I started looking at this case. The niece is in 8th grade. She has lost her mother, her father, and is living with her uncle. And in 8th grade, they're talking about the night of the murder. In 8th grade, her uncle is killed. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and they are going to be some of the critical witnesses here. Yes, I see that Officer O'Keefe's mom is dabbing at her eyes. It's going to happen. It's the layout of this courtroom. I think she's doing a pretty good job of keeping her eyes down and not being overly emotive, but it's a lot. So for those of you that missed that in the opening statements, because he's a little hard to hear, that's what he's talking about, what the niece and nephew had been through. For non-Americans, 8th grade is 12, 13, right in there. So the fact that at like 12, 13, or 13 going on 14, you have lost all of your caregivers is horrible. I should know this. I have 2 kids in school. But yeah, right, 13. It's just heartbreaking to me.
Private school called Bishop Deacon, and they both found out on the 28th that they had been accepted to that school. So
into a private high school.
Friend, as well as her father, a gentleman by the name of Michael Camerano.
Oh, sir, I should have kept going. I should have just.
Wife, Catherine
Emily,
Camerano,
just shut up and let it go.
With John O'Keefe. They had children around the same ages as both John's niece and his nephew. And they had come over to their house on Meadows Ave that evening to celebrate the girls getting into that school. The nephew of John, the 11-year-old, was sleeping over a friend's house that night. He left that home sometime around 7 p.m. or so, got picked up, and went to sleep over at his friend's house. John O'Keefe and Michael Camerano then decided to travel out to a local establishment on Washington Street called C.F. McCarthy's Bar and Restaurant. You're going to hear testimony, and you're going to see surveillance video, and you're going to see receipts and all kinds of things from a variety of different establishments, all sort of located within Camden Center along that strip in Washington Street. Now, they get Mr. O'Keefe and Mr. Camerano leave the girls at home. They then go to C.F. McCarthy's, arriving there sometime between 7:30 and 8 p.m.
What I don't like is that he
cajole another friend of theirs
has not
Roberts,
told the story. He's jumped right into the details.
As well, and there's some other people that are located within the bar, including Mr. James
Give
Sullivan,
the story.
who was present at the bar that night as well.
Come on.
Eventually, the defendant, Karen Reed, joins them at this establishment, C.F. McCarthy's.
Well, it was going to be snowing, so they didn't have anything to do the next day, so they went to the bar.
Now, John O'Keefe and Karen Reed had met sometime in 2004.
They're all cops. They probably all have 4x4s.
Briefly
They're like,
during that
snow.
time, and reconnected sometime around March of 2020, around the time of the COVID-19 sort of pandemic shutdown. They had started dating around that time period, or reconnected during that time period, and the defendant had stayed at the house in Canton several nights a week. She had helped out with the children. In the month or so leading up to Mr. O'Keefe's death, the relationship soured. You will see text messages between Mr.
This is their
O'Keefe
theory
and
of the
Ms. Reed,
case.
To that effect. You will hear testimony from the children, from John's niece and nephew, in regard to things they observed within that relationship. And you'll hear testimony from other individuals as far as their observations or things that they heard. Turning to January 29th, 2022. Just after 6 a.m., the Canton Police Department receives a 911 call from a woman reporting a male party, subsequently identified as John O'Keefe, found in the snow outside a residence at 34 Fairview Road. At the time, as I mentioned, the blizzards that had been predicted was occurring, heavy snow, temperatures in the teens, wind bustling around. Officer Stephen Sarif and Officer Stephen Mulaney of the Canton Police were dispatched along with Canton Fire and EMS, and you'll hear from them in regard to their response and what they observed on scene. In particular, with Officer Sarif,
I want to see the prosecutor.
Have as an exhibit, I anticipate a cruiser camera video from his cruiser detailing, memorializing sort of his response in the darkness, in the blizzard-type conditions, as he's driving from the Canton Police Station, where he was located when he received the call, to 34 Fairview Road. When they arrived there, they observed 3 individuals, 3 females, sort of off to the left side of the property. And when I say the left side of the property, I mean if you're standing out in the street facing 34 Fairview Road, off to the left side of the property, there's a flagpole, there's a fire hydrant, There's some bushes. That is where Mr. O'Keefe is located. To the right side of the property is sort of the driveway and the mailbox and other things that you'll become familiar with through photographic evidence and other means through the course of this trial. The three females that the officers observed there were then identified as the defendant, Karen Reed, Mrs. Jennifer McCabe, who had received a phone call earlier in the morning from the defendant, as well as Mrs. Kerry Roberts, who had also received a phone call early that morning from the defendant. The several firefighters from the Canton Fire Department you'll hear from in regard to their observations of injuries,
This is the morning
lacerations to the
that
right
he's
arm of
found.
Mr. O'Keefe. You'll hear their testimony in regard to swelling of his eyes and other injuries that he observed. They observed redness from the cold that he had been lying out in for some time. You'll hear the testimony from these firefighters: Timothy Nuttall, Anthony Flamati, Matthew Kelly, Francis Walsh, Katie McLaughlin, and Greg Woodbury. And at least from three of those firefighters, you'll hear testimony anticipates detailing statements that the defendant made to them when they had asked about the origination.
Yeah,
of
I
some
would
of those
highlight
injuries.
those with
And
maybe a
stated repeatedly,
change in
I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
pacing. He's
Mr.
saying
O'Keefe,
that the defendant
taken
said
from front
to
lawn
first responders, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
stretcher. As he's doing that, I anticipate you'll hear Ms. Roberts' testimony that despite the 6 inches of snow approximately that was on top of Mr. O'Keefe's body and the snow throughout the roadway, front yard, everywhere around where he was, there was grass underneath Mr. O'Keefe, where his cell phone was located underneath his body as he lay on that front lawn. He was then transported by
The grass will
firefighters
matter.
Kelly, Flamati, and Nuttall, as well as the ambulance being driven by firefighter McLaughlin to the Good Samaritan Medical Center. Once there were some observations, and you'll hear testimony from Dr. Justin Rice from that facility as far as observations consistent with what I anticipate.
They're going to argue that he couldn't have been dragged outside later on because he was outside and then the snow fell on him first. We'll see what the defense says about that
Hear from those firefighters.
in their opening.
But then there is a certain warming procedure that they go through trying to bring his body temperature up. Because when Mr. O'Keefe arrives at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, his body temperature is 80. And
That's not
after
good.
those resuscitative efforts prove unsuccessful,
Yep.
Mr. O'Keefe is eventually pronounced by Dr. Rice at approximately 7:50 in the morning. Shortly after that, when the defendant is then being driven away from the scene by Ms. Roberts, who is now going to go pick up Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe, John O'Keefe's parents in Braintree, and then bring them to the Samaritan Medical Center in Brock, the defendant makes some statements of self-harm. As a result of that, she's then transported to the Good Samaritan Medical Center as well by two firefighters named Daniel Whitley and Jason Becker. And amongst the statements that they gained from the defendant as they're having a conversation with her in regard to that, in regard to a treatment and diagnosis, she indicates that the last that she saw Mr. O'Keefe, they had gotten into an argument before he had gotten out of the car in front of Fairview Road. Now, you'll also hear testimony from some of the other first responding officers from the Canton Police Department, including Lieutenant Paul Gallagher, Sergeant Sean Good, and Sergeant Michael Lenk, in regard to their initial response, their observations, people that they spoke to, where they went, and their ability to recover within these blizzard conditions that are still ongoing, certain pieces of evidence that they located in around the area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found. You'll also hear from Lieutenant Charles Ray.
Are you going to talk about what that evidence is or no?
With, at this point in time, the Canton Police were unaware that the nephew was over at a sleepover. They were unaware that Mr. Camerano had come over.
Oh, they went to go do a
and picked up the niece and bringing her back to his house.
A welfare check.
As she was left unattended when the defendant left to go looking for Mr. O'Keefe. So unaware of that, they go do a well-being check at approximately 8:22 in the morning. And they also have cruiser camera video attached to their cruiser. And you'll see that video and when they pull into the driveway at Meadows Ave, approximately 8:22 in the morning, they pull in directly behind where eventually you'll hear Ms. McCabe left the defendant's vehicle after driving it from her house to Meadows Ave in search of Mr. O'Keefe. And you'll have that footage, and you'll be able to see the back of the defendant's vehicle, specifically the right rear taillight of that vehicle. Now, you'll also hear testimony, as I mentioned, from the Cameranos, from Mr. Roberts, from Mr. Sullivan. They were all present with the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe at C.F. McCarthy's. You'll hear testimony from a number of other individuals who were at the Waterfall. The Waterfall is a bar located across the street, essentially, from C.F. McCarthy's on Washington Street in Canton Center, and somewhere that Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant went after leaving C.F. McCarthy's at approximately 11 p.m. or so. Now, from that establishment, you'll hear from Rebecca Trayers, who was working as a bartender at the Waterfall that evening. You'll hear from a couple named Nicholas and Karina Polakaitis, who were friends of friends, who had known Mr. O'Keefe through their daughter around the same age as Mr. O'Keefe. Mrs. Polakaitis had some conversation with the defendant that evening, as well as herself and Mrs. McCabe at the Waterfall.
So now we've jumped back in time.
Same time as they did.
We've jumped back in time to what happened before.
Same area as Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed did, specifically in Ms. Reed's car.
The victim died.
And she observed Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant walking toward the defendant's vehicle.
This was after they were at the bar.
Walking towards the driver's side of the vehicle.
Sir.
Now, you'll hear testimony from a Christopher and Julie Albert.
You're not easy to follow.
Who were at one point neighbors of Mr. O'Keefe.
Okay.
Knew him well from being...
My opinion on why he's hard to follow, he knows this case so well that he is talking about it not in order, and he's not telling you the story of it. It makes it hard to follow.
Neighbors
this is
of him.
A very common opening.
A pizza shop, also located within that Cannon Center area.
Sir, can we get an overview?
Mr.
I don't
O'Keefe,
care if he owns a pizza shop.
On the 28th, had been into that pizza shop along with his nephew to get his nephew a slice. Christopher Albert and Mr. O'Keefe.
I mean, if you're going to give us that much detail, what kind of slice was it? I mean, now I want to know.
We had some conversation regarding what they were doing.
There's a
that
pizza
night.
place near UMass Amherst.
Texts Mr. O'Keefe and indicates that they're over at the Waterfall and that he should come over shortly before
Best pizza.
Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant make their way from C.F. McCarthy's over. Now, Christopher Albert left directly from the Waterfall and went home. He lives sort of walking distance away from there. His wife, Julie Albert, had left earlier in the evening. There was a band playing at the Waterfall that night. Mrs. Julie Albert started to get a migraine.
What kind of band?
Before most of the group.
Now I want all the details.
Included within that group, and sort of how they came to the Waterfall, the Albert family in particular. Julie Albert went there.
The Alberts are going to be critical witnesses here.
Sister-in-law, Nicole Albert, as well as her niece, Caitlin Albert, her niece's boyfriend, and Mr. Tristan Morris, and they had had dinner at the Waterfall earlier in that evening.
I think the jury's regretting not having more coffee this morning.
She has a husband named Brian Albert, who's also a Boston police officer. Brian Albert had gone with a friend of his, who's also in law enforcement, a man named Brian Higgins, and they had gone separately but had come home together from a funeral for a fallen police officer in New York City. They came home early to sort of beat the weather, and eventually they meet up with Brian Albert's family at the Waterfall. Now, Tristan Morris, who was Caitlin Albert's boyfriend, had left the Waterfall at some point in the evening. He then
we are now lost in who all these people are.
Fairview Road and picks up Caitlin Albert, brings her home. All of this is in relation to Brian Albert and Nicole Albert's son, Brian Albert Jr., whose birthday was coming up the following day, the day of the snowstorm.
They went from the bar to the house where the victim was
found. He had been back
found.
at the house at 34 Fairview while his family was out at the Waterfall.
He hasn't
had a number of friends that had
yet.
come over that evening to celebrate his birthday with him. Now, among those friends was two individuals named Sarah Levinson and Julie Nagel.
If you're confused, the jury's confused. It's so many names.
For a good portion. Now, those individuals from the Waterfall.
It's like when your kid tells you a story about kids you don't know, you're like,
34 Fairview. They do so sometime shortly after midnight. Shortly after midnight is when it starts to snow. Flurries are starting to come down. Snow is starting to stick to some degree to the road, to the front lawn, to the grassy areas around the town. Now,
my first time driving in the snow ever was as a freshman at UMass Amherst.
Back is obviously Brian Albert and Nicole Albert.
Not a great experience.
Caitlin Albert, because it's her parents and her boyfriend is picking her up, as well as Jennifer McCabe, who is Nicole Albert's sister, and her husband Matthew McCabe.
All the interpersonal relationships.
There's an open invitation to essentially anybody that's there. John O'Keefe takes them up on that. There are certain text messages and phone conversations between John O'Keefe and Jennifer McCabe as to where this house is located, as he's never been there before. And then he and the defendant drive in the defendant's vehicle to 34 Fairview. And once there are several witnesses from within the home that observe the vehicle parked in. So I mentioned earlier there were two females that were with Brian Albert Jr. at the house, one of them being Julie Nick. At some point, she had called her brother, Mr. Ryan, for a ride home. He then gets a ride from his friend, Ricky Antonio, as well as his Nagel's girlfriend, Heather Max.
I guarantee you everybody's like, hey, Ricky. All the time. My brain immediately.
I say that because they arrive at
Ricky.
Fairview Road around the same time as the defendant.
That's the
Defendant is coming in
scene.
from one direction. The pickup truck with the Nagel brother is coming in from another direction. The pickup truck that the Nagel brothers riding in flashes its lights, signaling the defendant to go. She goes first. They follow in behind, and lo and behold, they end up at the same house.
Hey, big.
They park the pickup truck somewhere in that right side of the property, facing it from the street in the area of the driveway, and the defendant in her black Lexus SUV.
All right, Chad,
parks
I'll be
a
right
little bit
back.
Further up. Different people from within the pickup.
He didn't say what kind of Lexus SUV was it?
House observed
He just
that
talked about the
Lexus
Lexus.
SUV in one location, pull up a little bit further, and then pull up a little bit further till it's in the area of that fire hydrant, of that flagpole, where Mr. O'Keefe is located the following morning. Now, from their position, I anticipate the testimony that you're going to hear is that Heather Maxon from that pickup truck observes a male passenger and a female operator when the pickup truck operator flashes those lights at the vehicle as they're facing each other before they pull down the Fairview. What you'll hear also, I anticipate, from all three of those individuals in the pickup and Julie Nagel, who comes out to the pickup to talk to the brother, is that no one ever exits that vehicle. There are no footprints around that vehicle. There's no damage that they observed to that vehicle at that time. Again, it's just started to snow. Things aren't sticking really too much at this point. Julie Nagel has a conversation with her brother, decides that she's going to stay at the house longer, so the arrangements for a ride home, and the pickup truck leaves from that point. As they pass by, they observe a female operator matching what I submit as the description of the defendant. From all of those people within that house that evening, none of them at any point in time observed John O'Keefe come into the house. They see the vehicle out front, they see the vehicle pull away, and they just assume that they left and that no one was coming in.
That is an attempt to rebut the defense's
Clear
argument
testimony from other
that the victim was
individuals who were at
inside the house.
that night, including Colin
That is
Albert,
going to
who
be
is
a
Julie
critical
Nagel
fact in this
son. He's
case.
also the cousin of Brian Albert
Sorry, Dr.
Jr.,
B
who
needed
was
me to
having
put
people over for
his
birthday.
10s unit on his back.
He's leaving the house around the time that the initial people coming back from the waterfall, which includes the homeowners.
Yeah, it's a lot of
Mr.
detail
Higgins
without an
was coming
overview.
Into the house. At that point, Colin Albert is leaving. He's getting picked up by a young lady named Allison McCabe, who is Jennifer and Matthew
I will say this
McCabe's
is very typical of opening statements.
Who's also friends with Colin Albert.
We've
and
had
also
some much more
cousins
interesting
of
attorneys or
Brian Albert Jr., who's within the home celebrating his birthday.
more.
As I mentioned, you'll hear testimony from Matthew McCabe and from Jennifer McCabe in regard to their observations that particular evening, both at the
More of a
waterfall
story.
as well as at the residence on Fairview Road. And then you'll hear testimony in regard to a phone call.
I want to hear about the phone call.
that Jennifer McCabe receives from John O'Keefe's
I know about the
niece
Google
at
searches.
approximately 4:53 in the morning. She answers that phone call, speaks to the niece briefly, and the niece hands the phone over to the defendant. Now, you'll hear testimony from the niece as well, that about 4:30 in the morning or so, the defendant came into her room in a frantic state, saying that Mr. O'Keefe had not come home the night before. So initially, when the defendant is talking to Ms. McCabe, she indicates to Ms. McCabe that the last time she saw Mr. O'Keefe was at the waterfall. Eventually, as Ms. McCabe is waking up, she reminds the defendant that she not only saw them leave the waterfall around the same time as herself, but also saw the vehicle, the defendant's vehicle, outside of the home on Fairview Road. Eventually, the defendant, while driving around, and this will come in as far as other testimony and related testimony as it develops, but she's driving around in that morning. She's calling a bunch of number of different people, friends of Mr. O'Keefe. She's calling Mr. O'Keefe himself. She also calls Ms. Roberts. So Carrie Roberts receives a call about 5 a.m. from the defendant indicating that Mr. O'Keefe did not come home, indicating that he got hit by a plow or that he must be dead. Ms. Roberts then gets...
Sir, you're saying that the defendant is making phone calls saying that he must have gotten hit by a snowplow and must be dead at 5 a.m. the morning before they find him, and there's no change in your voice? None? No change in your voice at all? Like, he's just like, you know, and she's telling people at 5 a.m. before he's even found that he must have gotten hit by a snowplow and be dead. Sir, what?
It's ready. Mr. McCabe is getting ready as they're all sort of planning to go out and look for Mr. O'Keefe and see if they can locate him. They call numerous times, and you see that within the text messages and the phone extractions from a variety of people's different phones throughout the course of this trial as well. So eventually the defendant comes to Ms. McCabe's home.
Nothing.
Indicates at some point prior to that she has a cracked tailpipe. Ms. McCabe then gets in the driver's seat due to the defendant's frantic state. Ms. Roberts is there as well. Ms. Roberts follows Ms. McCabe driving the defendant's vehicle back to Mr. O'Keefe's residence on Meadows Ave.
I'll just show you what's happening in my house right now.
The defendant then shows both Ms. Roberts and Ms. McCabe.
Fred, the trial kitty, is very interested.
Her right rear tail light, which is essentially missing a number of different pieces
Fred's ready.
From that right rear tail light. They then proceed off to drive and see if they can locate Mr. O'Keefe. The defendant is insistent that they go to that residence on Fairview Road. Again, they're driving down there in the dark, in the snow, in the wind, in the blizzard. As they approach towards that residence, there is one person. So they're seated within the vehicle. This is Ms. Roberts' vehicle, where she's driving.
Yeah, we have no idea what vehicle and who's in it.
Seat, and the defendant is in the rear passenger seat. The defendant is the only one who sees Mr. O'Keefe. He yells and screams at Ms. Roberts to stop the vehicle. Ms. Roberts and Ms. McCabe, I anticipate, will testify that they did not see Mr. O'Keefe, not only as they were driving past him, but even after they got out of the vehicle, until the defendant gets out of the back seat and makes a beeline essentially right over to where Mr. O'Keefe.
They're going to use that to argue she must have known where she hit him because she's the only one that saw him, I would imagine.
Shortly after that is when the officers and the firefighters arrive on scene. Now, while they're waiting there, at approximately 6:23, 6:24 a.m., during a conversation with the defendant asks Ms. McCabe to look up on her phone how long someone has to be out in the cold to die from hypothermia, or something to that effect. And you'll hear some dispute as to when that search was made. And you'll hear testimony from three different forensic extraction experts,
That's mild.
Ms. Jessica Hyde, and Mr. Ian Whiffen, who you'll hear about a lot of these things called extraction reports from cell phones.
There's a lot of dispute about when that search happened.
Mr. Whiffen is someone who writes that software for Cell Run. I anticipate you'll hear from each of their testimonies that that Google search that was done on Ms. McCabe's phone was done at the same time frame that she indicates the defendant requested her to do it, and that at 6:23 and 6:24 in the morning.
He says 6:23 and 6:24 in the morning.
Here, testimony from Ms. Roberts, Ms. McCabe, the firefighters, and the responding Canton police officers about a repeated phraseology that the defendant stated while there, asking again and again in regard to Mr. O'Keefe, is he dead? Is he dead? You will also hear testimony, as I indicated, about sort of treatment that she received at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, and that would involve testimony of Ms. Daisy Ormstep, Ms. Kathleen Wilford, and Dr. Gary Fowler. You'll hear testimony from a number of different analysts from the State Police Crime Lab and from some other laboratories as well. Included within that will be Mr. Nicholas Roberts and Ms. Maureen Hartnett, Mr. Andre Porto, Ms. Ashley Vallier, and Ms. Christina Hampton, those all being from the State Police Lab. You will hear testimony in regard to an incident which occurred earlier.
I'm very interested in all the Celebrate extractions.
Mr. O'Keefe, the defendant.
Did we go back in time
children
again?
Have been invited with a much larger group, approximately 70 people or so, to spend New Year's in Aruba. This is a trip that was organized by a friend of Mr. O'Keefe's named Laura Sullivan. We'll hear a testimony from her, as well as from her sister, Miss Marietta Sullivan, as well as you'll hear testimony from the two children.
He's getting into the nature of the relationship.
And essentially, day 2 or so of this trip, Marietta Sullivan, the sister of Laura, is walking through the lobby and she runs into Mr. O'Keefe. This is someone she refers to as Godfather because John O'Keefe is also the godfather of Laura Sullivan.
Listless, this is a very normal opening statement.
Runs into
This
him
is
in
what
the
you're going to
lobby,
see in
gives him a hug,
most
and
cases,
sort of
most
points him in the
courts.
direction of where she believes he's going into his room. The defendant is in the area. The defendant starts yelling and screaming and swearing at Ms. Sullivan. Ms. Sullivan responds in kind. And essentially, for the most part, the Sullivan sisters see very little of Mr. O'Keefe throughout the remainder of their trip.
The focus on the
and we also hear testimony from the children that shortly after
argument
this, or
and not on the
immediately after this,
manner
there was
and
a
cause of death is
approximately 20-minute
telling
screaming match
to me.
Going on between Mr. O'Keefe and the defendant within their hotel room in front of the children. Now, you'll also hear testimony from the defendant's phone in regard to, and from another individual's phone in regard to that Aruba, in regard to text messages of an amorous nature that she had with Mr. Brian Higgins, who
And
was
an
at the
affair.
Waterfall, and also at the residence on 34th
An
Avenue,
alleged
because
affair.
he was friends with the homeowner, Brian Albert, but he was also friends with
Lots of
Mr.
Brians.
O'Keefe and had also met the defendant. And throughout the course of those
Higgins is an
amorous
ATF
text
agent that was on
messages,
loan.
references that the defendant makes
Or
to
state
that
law enforcement that was on loan.
incident in Aruba, as she purported to be Mr. O'Keefe cheating on her. She insists that he was making out with Marietta Sullivan in that lobby as opposed to her giving him a hug. And makes repeated reference to that within the contents of those text messages as well. Now, you'll hear testimony from a number of different other individuals. Mr. Michael Trotter, who has a supervisory role with the Canton Department of Public Works. You'll hear from Mr. Louis Jutras, who has a supervisory role with regard to IT, with regard to certain video
not go full
recovered from the town of Canton,
My full
as
screen,
well
not
as from
full.
a temple located.
If I could
along
follow
the
him, I would have
defendant
sped
traveled,
him up, but
going
I'm
away from Fairview that evening, as well
not
as
following.
to Fairview from the waterfall, away from Fairview to Mr. O'Keefe's residence on
also
Meadow.
they've been in trial like
And
3
then
weeks
later in the
already
morning,
with
at
jury
5,
selection.
because if you recall, Ms. McCabe, I anticipate, would testify that she receives the call from the defendant about 4:53 in the morning. The defendant then drives around Canton for some perceptible half-hour or so period of time prior to even getting to Ms. McCabe's house. And
We're back in time
what
to
I
the
submit
night of the
evidence, or
murder.
I anticipate the evidence will show, based on sort of the tracking of her phone records, testimony you'll hear from Lieutenant Brian Tully of the State Police, from these Bolte records and RTT accounts. That
What's
the
an RTT
defendant, while
account?
she's using her phone, is driving in the direction
them?
of Fairview Road prior to going to Mrs. McCabe's house, where she meets Ms. McCabe and Ms. Roberts. Now, again, you'll hear testimony
keeps
from a number of
jumping
different
back and forth in
troopers who were
time,
involved in the investigation,
which is hard to
with regard
follow.
to this case, you'll hear from Trooper Michael Proctor and Sergeant Yuri Mechanic of the State Police. You'll hear from Lieutenant Brian Tully. You'll hear some testimony from Trooper Joseph Hall, who's in a specialized unit within the State Police called PARS for short, but essentially a collision analysis and reconstruction section within
Collision
the
analysis.
Massachusetts State Police. His examination of the vehicle, his examination of the scene, his examination of specifically some Toyota Textron, because Lexus is essentially owned by Toyota or vice versa. So there is some data that he's able to recover from that and back the vehicle up based on its known locations and travel and key cycles, and essentially opines, anticipate he'll opine that around 12:45 in the morning, when the vehicle was in front of the residence on Fairview, that for some perceptible period of time, that vehicle travels over 60 feet in reverse at over approximately 24.2 miles per hour. Now, you'll hear testimony, as I said, from a number of different
Tie that
troopers,
into
as
whether
well
or
as,
not that's
from a
what
number of
caused
different
the death,
analysts,
though.
from different labs. Included within that is Miss Maureen Hartnett, who collected items from the vehicle, the defendant's vehicle, including the taillight, sort of housing from that vehicle, pieces of the taillight that were discovered in sort of front grass and front street area. There is a specialized team called CERT team. You'll hear from Lieutenant Kevin O'Hara, who has a supervisory role in relation to that. And then later on that day of the 29th, he, along with Lieutenant Tully and a number of different members from his CERT team, were searching for evidence within the mounds of snow in front of that house, as the blizzard is still
And what did they
ongoing
find and where?
through sort of the afternoon hours.
The evidence will
Among
show
the
they
items that
found.
they locate is
Thank
a
you.
sneaker. When Mr. O'Keefe is transported to the hospital, he's found to only have one sneaker on his feet. They find the other sneaker in that area of the body. They find various pieces of taillight And as is wont to do, over the course of the following days,
What time?
temperatures rise, there's a rainstorm that comes in, and the snow melts. And over those successive days, there are additional pieces of taillights that are eventually discovered in that area of the front lawn in the street. Now, from these different pieces, Ms. Hartnett also locates a cocktail glass that's located on the bumper or the rear area of that scene, and she locates a human hair on the back of that defendant's vehicle as well. Now, the cocktail glass on the bumper, you'll also see surveillance video from the waterfall, and Mr. O'Keefe is observed on that surveillance video essentially walking out of the waterfall with a cocktail glass in his right hand. Same right hand that has minor injuries to it, and the same right hand that's attached to his right arm that has the abrasions and lacerations that are observed by the paramedics, that are observed by the doctors at Good Samaritan.
Was there a question that his right hand was no longer attached? Why are we clarifying that?
We'll hear testimony from another analyst, Christina Hanley, about the forensic consistency between a drinking glass that was in the defendant's bumper and the drinking glass pieces that were found on scene at 34th Fairview. You'll hear her testimony in regard to pieces of red and clear plastic that were microscopic in size that were found within Mr. O'Keefe's clothing. Consistent, in her opinion, I anticipate she'll testify, with the same pieces of plastic contained within the defendant's taillight. You'll hear from an Ashley Valerie, who works for the lab as well, and how she fit the various pieces of broken taillight from the scene together and over that taillight housing, finding them to be consistent with each other as well. You'll hear testimony from Andre Porto, who's essentially DNA analyst for the lab, and samples that were DNA samples that were taken from the taillight, from the clothes of Mr. O'Keefe, and the broken drinking glass that were consistent with Mr. O'Keefe. Those items were also sent, the taillight pieces, the taillight DNA was also sent to an independent lab, Bodie Technologies, located in Lorton, Virginia. And you'll hear from an analyst there, Mr. Nicholas Bradford, indicating that the DNA on the defendant's taillight, in his opinion, is consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe, and inconsistent with Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Mechanic, who were the two
Inconsistent with the investigating officers.
Primary investigators when it came to this case. You'll also hear from this test chart from that Bodie Laboratories in regard to some mitochondrial DNA that she examined in regard to that hair that Ms. Hartnett found on the bumper of the car, in her opinion that it was consistent with that of Mr. O'Keefe as well.
So he said that the cocktail glass was in the bumper. It seems like
Lastly,
they're
you'll
going to
also
argue
hear
that came from the
Dr.
bar to
Irene
the house,
Scorbello and Dr.
and it was
Renee
found at the
Stonebridge
scene,
of the Office of the Chief Medical Team.
and in the bumper,
In regard to
DNA.
their various examinations, Dr. Stonebridge is a neuropathologist. She essentially examines brain findings. Dr. Irene
This is
Scorbello,
gonna go to injury, I
a
imagine.
forensic pathologist who does the sort of autopsy and medical examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body. And you'll hear about the variety of sort of injuries that she observed over Mr. O'Keefe's body from it. In particular, you'll hear testimony in regard to lacerations to the right back of his head. You'll hear testimony in regard to an initial sort of skull fracture that occurs to the back of his head, and then sort of a radiating skull fracture that goes throughout his skull, which then leads to subdural hemorrhage, or essentially bleeding on the brain, and then swelling of the brain, which then causes a condition called ecchymosis, which then sort of leads to the swelling of both of Mr. O'Keefe's eyes that is observed by the initial response. You will hear various testimony about sort of issues in regard to his pancreas and how that's indicative of hypothermia. Now again, as I said, this is the first of 2 times that I have an opportunity to address you directly. And I thank you very much for your attention
And
today.
he's done.
I thank you for the anticipation of your close attention as we go through all of the witnesses and all the evidence in this case. That second time that I do get to address you, what I'll be asking you to do, based on the evidence, and again, as the board has instructed you, you are the sole arbiters of the facts of this case. You are the ones who find what the facts, and I reiterate that, the facts, and what the evidence demonstrates in this case. And what I submit to you at that time, that second time, is that the only true and just verdict based on that is that the defendant, Karen Reed, is guilty of murder in the 2nd degree, striking the the victim, Mr. O'Keefe, with a car, knocking him back onto the ground, striking his head on the ground, causing the bleeding in his brain, swelling, and then leaving him there for several hours in a blizzard with temperatures in the teens, wind swirling
That's their
around,
theory.
snow piling up on his body until she comes with Mrs. McCabe and Mrs. Roberts just after 6 a.m. And that she is also guilty of vehicular manslaughter, operating under the influence of liquor, and that she is also guilty of leaving the scene after causing death. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, we are going to.
Thank you, Mr. Mallory. Mr. Betty?
We are going to get to the
Your Honor. May it
defense
please the court.
closing or the defense. Emily, we are going to get to the defense opening in just a second. I'm going to switch feeds so we have some closed captioning. There is no microphone up at the podium where counsel is arguing. So I am optimistic that switching to closed captioning will maybe help some, but it was a very dry opening statement from the prosecution. They did not, I think, give a great overview of what the case is about. It wasn't until the very end when they said that they believe that the defendant hit the victim with a car and then left him in the snow to die. There was a lot of back and forth in time, information about the relationship, a suspected affair, discord in the relationship, and talking about the granular evidence, but it was not an overview. He did not, in my opinion, do a great job of laying the roadmap. I say opening should show you the picture on the box of the puzzle. He showed the jury a whole bunch of puzzle pieces and at the end said, but there's a picture, don't worry. Sir, what? It was a lot of little pieces. Loves Woodhart in the chat said, an affair? I didn't catch that. He was talking about amorous text messages with Brian Higgins and kind of scooted right by it. So let's get to the defense opening statement. We have closed captioning on this feed, so hopefully that will make it a little bit easier. Hopefully the sound on this feed is good. Let me gain this up just a little bit more. It's about as gained up as we can get, which is going to make the judge sound awful. Oh, that background noise is killing me.
Karen Reed was framed.
Well, the defense is definitely coming in with their theory of the case a bit faster than the prosecution did. Let's get these closed captions up. All right. Well, you know, if you're going to follow a theory of the case, that's a little easier to follow so far. It should be the evidence will show.
Karen Reed was framed. Her car never struck John O'Keefe. She did not cause his death. And that means that somebody else did. You will learn that it was no accident
It's kind
that
of
John
argument.
O'Keefe was found dead on the front lawn of 34 Fairview Road in
It says
Canton
closed
on
captions.
January 29th of 2022.
They are not there.
You will learn that at that address lived a well-known and well-connected law enforcement family in Canton, the Alberts. Because the Alberts were involved, and because they had close connections to the investigators in this case, Karen Reed was framed for a murder she did not commit.
Little argument.
Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. As I previously told you, my name is David Yannetti.
Yeah,
I'm an attorney with an office in Boston.
the jury's awake
Together
now.
with attorneys Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little.
I think it's a good choice to have the
It's
local
truly
attorney
my
open.
privilege and my honor to represent Karen Reed during this trial.
Defense attorneys love it's my privilege to represent.
From a
Pooh said
very
it over
early
and
juncture
over.
in this case, you will question the Commonwealth's theory of the case. You will question the quality of the Commonwealth's evidence. You will question the veracity
evidence
of the
will
Commonwealth's witnesses. And you will question their shoddy and biased investigation, a faulty investigation that led to Karen Reed
No one's
sitting
objecting.
here today. You will learn, in short, that the police did no real investigation of this case. And
Is that a
you will
bottle of
question
crime?
You'll question why the investigators had such tunnel vision.
So distracted.
You'll question why
Right on top of
they
his head.
focused solely on Karen Reed. someone with no ties to the Canton Police Department, as opposed to the well-known and well-connected Albert family of Canton.
He could say the evidence will
Family that
show.
was never treated.
Oh, yeah, he's
as
much easier to
suspects
follow,
by the
Chad.
investigators in this case. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found mortally injured on Brian Albert's front lawn.
He's very
His
engaging.
body was in full view and almost right below Brian Albert's bedroom window on his front lawn. He was found wearing only one sneaker. You'll learn that Brian Albert was a Boston police officer as well, and that he was a trained first responder. Brian Albert was notified that another police officer was injured and unresponsive on his front lawn.
When?
And Brian Albert did nothing.
That's
His
interesting.
sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, and other civilians were on his property that morning after John O'Keefe's body was found. Police, EMTs, firefighters, police cruisers, an ambulance, fire truck, lights flashing. And first responder Brian Albert never came out of his house.
That's real interesting to
Equally
me.
important for you will be the fact that the lead homicide investigators never went inside the Albert home that morning.
That's weird.
You will learn that Brian Albert's brother, Kevin Albert, is a Canton police officer. It was obvious very early on that the Canton police should not be investigating the death of a man found on the property of the brother of a Canton police officer.
That's weird.
So it was decided just about from the start that the Massachusetts State Police should take complete control of this investigation because the Canton police were conflicted out.
Yeah, they were.
Now, that sounded good at the time, but you'll learn that two major problems arose. First, despite the fact that they obviously had a conflict of interest, the evidence will show that the Canton police still had their hands in this investigation. You will find it astounding, but Canton police officer Kevin Albert, the reason for the conflict of interest in the first place, was continually updated about the status of this investigation while it was going on. Second, and equally troubling, is that the lead state police detective who was assigned to this case was a man named Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor, you will learn, is one of the many people in Canton with deep ties to the Albert family. Michael Proctor's own mother refers to the Alberts as the Proctor's second family. His own sister's wedding.
Oh, his mom and them are all up in this
Proctor was
trial.
the wedding party with Colin Albert. And he sat at the head table of that wedding with members of the Albert family. That's the man who was chosen to lead the investigation into the suspicious death on the property of Brian Albert. That's the man who gave updates to Canton police officer Kevin Albert, while the state police were supposed to be investigating what had occurred at his brother Brian Albert's house. You'll learn that right from the jump, Michael Proctor predetermined the outcome of this case. Never stepped foot inside the Albert home on January 29th, 2022. Never checked out whether there were any signs of struggle inside that home. He never called for crime scene technicians and other specialists to look for blood or other trace evidence within the home.
Yep, and I could follow
He never
you,
asked
Eddie.
Brian Albert for permission to go in the home and take a look around. Michael Proctor never applied for a search warrant to go in that home. Instead, he focused immediately and exclusively on Karen Reed, the outsider.
That's odd, isn't
You
it?
will learn that no one in the Proctor family has ever called the Reed family their second family. No one in the Proctor family had been in a wedding party with anyone from the Reed family.
We're right on the line
Karen
of
Reed
argument, but
was
it's
a convenient
an effective
outsider.
opening.
She was most definitely not from Canton. So how did Michael Proctor feel about her? How did he treat somebody he was investigating at a point in time when he should have been
That's their
keeping
theme
an
of the
open
case.
mind
a convenient
focusing on
outsider.
obtaining all possible evidence so that he didn't miss anything? Well, you will learn that on the very day that John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's lawn, Michael Proctor was texting with his high school buddies about this supposedly secret investigation, using his personal cell phone. He was revealing information about this investigation to his
Yikes.
friends, assuming that nobody would ever find out what he was doing and what he was saying.
Yikes.
And he was revealing his true thoughts about Karen Reed to his friends, not what he put in his sanitized police reports, his true feelings.
Oh boy.
To his friends whom he trusted, and in text messages that he never thought would come into the hands of the defense in this case.
Okay, well, we want to know what they are.
Lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor, right from the start, called Karen Reed names you would reserve only for your worst enemies.
And those are?
He told his friends that he hoped that she would kill herself.
Oh, shit.
He told his friends that he had seized her cell phone. And you will learn that he knew he shouldn't have been accessing any content on her cell phone because he knew there would likely be attorney-client
No, he
communications
did
on
not.
between Karen and me at that time. He knew that he was supposed to wait for a search warrant or other permission from a judge in order to go through that phone. But you'll learn that he went through the phone anyway, without permission. And you'll know that he did because he told his high school buddies that he was searching her phone for nude photos of Karen Reed.
Oh,
He
fucking
was
hell.
disappointed he hadn't found any yet.
What?
Is the professional and unbiased investigator who was chosen to lead the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. You will learn that one of Michael Proctor's high school friends commented to him that with a dead body on the front lawn, the homeowner in this case is surely going to catch a lot of grief. And do you know what Michael Proctor's response to that was? One word. Nope. He
Yikes.
explained why. Michael Proctor assured his buddies that the homeowner would not catch a lot of grief because, quote, the homeowner's a Boston cop too, end quote. That one sentence, ladies and gentlemen, in Michael Proctor's own words, will explain a lot to you
Well,
about how this investigation was
those
conducted.
text messages are
You
not going to
will
be
able
great.
to evaluate whether Trooper Michael Proctor treated Brian Albert and his family differently because of who they are and their relationships between his family and theirs.
Yikes.
You will evaluate whether this investigation was on the up and up. You will decide, as a result, how valuable or worthless the prosecution's DNA evidence is or is not.
I mean, that's a little bit of argument.
In light of who controlled that evidence. You will learn that
He's
Michael
practically
Proctor's fingerprints
snarling.
are
He's so
figuratively
angry.
all over this case. His fingerprints are all over the Commonwealth's evidence. You will learn that Michael
Wow.
Proctor showed up at Karen Reed's parents' house in Dighton to interview her during the afternoon of January 29th, only hours after John O'Keefe's body was found dead on Brian Albert's front lawn. You'll learn that Michael Proctor had her Lexus SUV towed from her parents' home. But you'll also learn that he wrote a search warrant in which he falsified the time that he took that SUV. He
Yikes.
swore under oath that the vehicle wasn't towed until 5:30 p.m. But you'll learn that we obtained surveillance footage.
Somebody's got a ring
We didn't
camera.
know we would get.
Everybody's got a ring
And that
camera.
surveillance footage exposed that Michael Proctor's words in that sworn affidavit were a lie. Michael Proctor had that vehicle for about 90 minutes before he claimed to have taken it. And folks, you will learn that the timing is important, very important. Because when John O'Keefe was first found on Brian Albert's front lawn, the police thoroughly searched that yard for potential evidence. And it wasn't just one officer, or two, or three. there were at least 4 officers that searched that front lawn.
So are you going to say they found
And
nothing
that
the
morning
first
was
time?
the beginning of a snowstorm, but there wasn't yet much snow on the ground when they were searching that lawn. It was light out by the time they did the search, and it was getting lighter. And during that thorough search of Brian Albert's front lawn, the number of pieces of taillight that were found by a minimum of 4 officers looking for evidence was 0. It was only later in the day, when the snow was really starting to accumulate, that the police miraculously started to find pieces of taillight on the property. The police only started to find pieces of taillight after Michael Proctor had seized
Back to the
Karen
lawyer.
Reed's
His
car.
facial expressions are
They
giving.
only started to find pieces of taillight after Michael Proctor had possession of her taillight. You'll learn that Trooper Michael Proctor then kept going back to the Albert residence after that day, and he claims to have kept finding pieces of taillight on multiple occasions on multiple different days. And in addition, a good week after John O'Keefe's death, Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz, an older officer on the brink of retirement with probably not the best eyesight,
I mean, we all get older.
He supposedly was driving.
Eyes are gonna eyes.
Happened to be driving past Brian Albert's house. And by the way, Brian Albert is someone with whom Chief Berkowitz is also good friends. And this older man allegedly spotted yet another piece of taillight from his moving vehicle.
Really?
This was yet another piece of taillight that was somehow missed by the trained specialists who had previously and thoroughly searched the property. Another piece of taillight that Proctor supposedly missed in the many times he went back to the property. Michael Proctor claims that he kept finding pieces of taillight right up until February 18th of 2022, which was nearly 3 weeks after John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's lawn. You will learn that there is no competent evidence that Karen Reed's taillight shattered at Brian Albert's
Can we go
property
back to the lawyer?
in the early morning hours
Please?
of January 29th of 2022. To the contrary,
Lawyer?
you'll learn that when Karen
Lawyer?
left John at Brian Albert's house, she drove back to John's house on Meadows Ave across town in Canton. At John's home, where he lived with his 2 adopted children, Karen was drifting in and out of sleep, but she woke up for good in a panic sometime around 4 a.m. because John hadn't come home. And that was not like him at all. He had never done that before. Karen had a sinking feeling that something was wrong. Something was seriously wrong. So she got back into her Lexus, and she backed up out of the garage to leave the driveway. And when she did, the right rear taillight of her Lexus struck John's parked vehicle in the driveway, and her taillight cracked. That was the same taillight that the prosecution now claims was broken outside the Albert residence hours earlier at 12:30 a.m. But we have video evidence that the taillight was actually broken at 5 a.m., many hours after the prosecution needs that taillight to have been broken. There is, of course, no video of the taillight being broken at Brian Albert's house. You will eventually conclude that that's because the taillight was not broken there. Importantly, you will learn that there was an eyewitness who arrived at 34 Fairview after Karen got there with John O'Keefe in the early morning hours of January 29th. And that eyewitness, Brian Nagel, who's the brother of Julie Nagel, who was at the after-hours party.
There's so many Brians.
He had a clear view of Karen's SUV. Brian Nagel confirms that there was no damage to her taillight at that time. Karen was sitting in the driver's seat with her hands at 10 and 2. And Ryan Nagel confirms that while Karen was inside the car, John O'Keefe was not. John O'Keefe was also not outside the car at that time. You will ultimately conclude there's only one other place he could have been. Now, going back to that 5 a.m.
He's letting all the
video
jury say inside the
from
house to
John's
themselves in
driveway,
their
you will
brain.
see Karen back up her Lexus and strike John's car at about 5 a.m. when she was leaving John's house to go out to look for him. And you will know that she struck his car at 5 a.m. because you will watch that video closely. You will witness that the wheels and the hubcaps on John's car are jostled and moved by Karen's SUV. And you will conclude that that video depicts exactly when Karen's taillight was cracked, long after she dropped off John that night at 34 Fairview. And you will learn that part of the reason that Karen's Lexus hit John's car was that Karen was panicked at that time. Where is John? Why didn't he come home? What happened to him? And you will learn that she was racking her brain for what possibly could have happened. And like many of us, was worried about the worst. Did I hit him? Could I have hit him? That was what she was saying.
So she did say
to
that.
herself and to other people later that morning when she went back to 34th Fairview.
Which is also an odd thing to say,
Couldn't
sir.
think of anything else that made sense. She certainly didn't consider in a million years that someone from within the Albert home could have beaten up John and left him to die on the front lawn.
I like that they addressed it, though,
Now, that was
because those
over
statements
2
aren't
years ago.
helpful to her.
Karen didn't know then what you will learn during this trial. Karen didn't know that Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house sometime after Karen pulled away. She didn't know that after Jennifer McCabe dropped off some people elsewhere, she returned to her own home. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe climbed some stairs in her home and eventually made it into her bedroom with her cell phone. Karen didn't know that Jennifer McCabe settled in
The evidence will show.
at 2:27 in the morning on January 29th of 2022 and typed a Google search that she would later delete. 2:27 in the morning was over 3 hours before John O'Keefe's body was found on Brian Albert's lawn. 2:27 was over 3 hours before anyone knew or suspected that John O'Keefe was missing or hurt or in trouble. And at 2:27 in the morning, you will learn that with no one watching her, thinking she was alone with her thoughts, and not worrying that anyone would know what she was doing, Jennifer McCabe typed in the following Google search: how long to die in the cold? Now, she misspelled the first word, so the actual search was how long to die in the cold, but you'll get the point. You will ask yourself, why would somebody Google how long does it take for someone to die in the cold?
Yeah,
Unless
I would sure like to know what you think about
person
that.
knew someone who either was in that situation or would be in that situation. You will question during this trial, who was it who actually did die in the cold at some point that night, sometime after Jen McCabe was asking Google for an answer to her question. And you'll learn that the answer to that question was John O'Keefe. The medical examiner in this case will testify that one of the causes of John O'Keefe's death was hypothermia. John O'Keefe died
Did
in part
in fact die
because
from being
he
left
was
in the snow.
left to die in the cold.
Yep.
Now, the Commonwealth will try to dispute the timing of that Google search. They'll try to claim
I mean, that's
that
argument.
there were only 2 Google searches at 6:23 and 6:24 a.m. after John's body was found. But one problem for the Commonwealth will be that we have retained
the
Richard
evidence
Green,
will
one of
show.
the leading computer forensic experts in the country. Rick Green has forensically analyzed Jennifer McCabe's phone, both manually
His facial
and using
expressions are
every
great.
appropriate type of computer software.
He's showing the
to
jury
solve this issue.
how
Rick
outraged
Green
they
will
should be about this
confirm for you that
prosecution.
Jennifer McCabe did indeed make that search at 2:27 a.m. And another problem for the Commonwealth is that you will hear and see other evidence
That prime bottle soda
that
distracting.
will confirm that Jennifer McCabe is lying when she denies making that Google search at 2:27 a.m.
It's going to be interesting when she
will
testifies.
conclude that before she went to bed, if she went to bed that night, Jennifer McCabe wanted to know just how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. And a big question in this trial for you will be, when was John O'Keefe left to die in the cold? I expect the Commonwealth will try to persuade you that he was left there sometime around 12:30 a.m. because they're going to try to prove to you that Karen Reed hit him and that his body stayed there the entire night until first responders arrived at 6 a.m. and his body was taken to the hospital. But you will learn that there are big problems with the Commonwealth's theory of this case. You will learn that there were 6 people at that
Sir, we don't know what the Commonwealth's theory of the case is because their opening was so fucking scattered, we don't know. Which is money for him because now every single one of these witnesses that testifies, the jury's got to be sitting there going, really? Really? Like, he is laying the groundwork for doubt before the first witness comes up, which is his job, and he is doing it very well. We don't know what the prosecution's theory of the case is because their opening was so in the weeds, it was impossible to follow.
after-hours party at Brian Albert's house.
He's laid the roadmap.
All of whom left by the front door and would have been confronted by John O'Keefe's lifeless body on that lawn if he was actually there at that time.
I talked, but that's a great point. If she hit him when her car shows she dropped him off, then you have a bunch of cops leaving a cop party that are just leaving someone lying in the snow? A fellow officer? Are you joking? That's an excellent point.
You will learn that there were 6 people at that after-hours party at Brian Albert's house.
That is an excellent point.
All of whom left by the front door and would have been confronted by John O'Keefe's lifeless body on that lawn if he was actually there at that time. Those 6 people walked out the front door to 34 Fairview, walked to their cars, either in the driveway or parked in front of the house.
Point.
Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, was there. Her husband, Matthew McCabe, was there. ATF federal agent Brian Higgins
with
was
the
there,
texty messages.
who was also Brian Albert's friend. Sarah Levinson, a friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there. Julie Nagel, another friend of Brian Albert Jr., was there. And Caitlin Albert, Brian Albert's daughter, was also there. All of them leaving the residence. Each of those people left 34 Fairview in Canton, where Brian Albert lived. Each of them walked out facing the front lawn, where the Commonwealth will tell you that a 6'2", nearly 220-pound big man in dark clothing was sprawled on the front lawn when there was only a dusting of white snow on the ground. He was supposedly sprawled on that lawn.
He got covered by the snow later.
Where these people were walking when they left the residence.
That's a very good point.
You will learn that not one of these people saw John O'Keefe laying.
How do you miss him?
Not one. And you know who else saw no one laying outside?
I mean, it is
morning hours.
There are some
January
arguments
29th?
in there.
The snowplow driver in charge of plowing the street for the city of Canton. And this is another big problem for the Commonwealth. You will learn that Michael Proctor, there's that name again, wrote a report where he claimed that the DPW supervisor had told him that Fairview Road had not been plowed that night. Proctor's total investigation
but you're not
on this
plowing
issue
a dusting of
consisted one
snow, though.
phone call.
How much snow was
no
there?
follow-up. He just submitted his report that simply said the road hadn't been plowed that night, and perhaps thinking that no one else would follow up either. But you'll learn that when it came to finding out the truth, it's not that Proctor couldn't find the truth, it's that he wouldn't. But fortunately, you'll learn that we would, and we did. You'll learn that within weeks after January 29th, we sent our investigator, a former Medford police officer named Paul Makowski, to the Canton DPW to try to get to the bottom of this. Paul Makowski talked to the same supervisor at the DPW, a man named Michael Trotta, whom Proctor claimed had told him that the street hadn't been plowed that night. You'll learn that Paul Makowski found out that Michael Proctor was not telling the truth.
Again.
You'll learn that Michael Trotta from the DPW told Paul Makowski, our investigator, that the street was indeed plowed that night, and that the name of the plow driver was Brian Loughran.
Another Brian.
So Paul Makowski tracked down Brian Loughran.
There's like 6.
He asked Mr. Loughran if the state police or any investigators had ever spoken to him.
How did the police not do that?
And the answer came back, no.
No one ever talked
You
to
will
him.
then learn what Brian Loughran had to say about what he saw and didn't see that night, and you will be shocked.
Oh, you're going to
Brian
leave it
Loughran
hanging?
told Paul Mikowski that he was driving a big snowplow in Canton that night. You'll learn that the nickname for it at the DPW was Frankenstein because it had a lot of spare parts in it. It had been around forever. Brian Loughran told Paul Mikowski that when he plows the streets of Canton in Frankenstein, he's very careful. He makes sure to check not only the roads in front of him, but also the yards to the side of his plow. He makes sure not to hit a fire hydrant or a tree or an animal, or heaven forbid, a person lying in the snow. He's always on the lookout. You'll learn that Brian Loughran passed by 34 Fairview in his plow, traveling right by Brian Albert's front lawn at 2:30 in the morning.
This is why they wanted to
Brian
review.
Loughran confirms that at about 2:30, when he went by that house, John O'Keefe was not on that front lawn. So you'll learn that about 2 hours after the Commonwealth claims that Karen Reed somehow incapacitated John O'Keefe, an eyewitness confirms that not only could it not have happened, but it didn't happen. But you'll learn that Brian Loughran also provides some other troubling testimony for the Commonwealth.
And
you'll
what
learn
is
that
it?
after making that pass at 2:30 in the morning and seeing no body, he showed up again at the entrance to Fairview Road,
At what time?
intending to make another pass down it with his plow. This time, however, at about 3:30 in the morning, he looked down the street and he saw that parked right next to Brian Albert's front lawn, right in the very area where John O'Keefe's body was later found at 6 a.m., Brian Loughran saw a Ford Edge parked on the side of the road. You will learn that the police have done zero investigation to discover whose Ford Edge that was. You'll learn that members of the Albert family drove Ford Edges. You'll learn that the police to this day claim not to know who was parked right next to the area where John O'Keefe's body was later found. You'll learn
That's
that while
weird.
investigators on this case, including Michael Proctor, completely ignored the snowplow driver who went right by the Albert residence, the defense not only tracked him down and interviewed him, but the plow driver actually took our investigator on a ride back past the residence to explain the precise
Oh,
route
and
that he
showed
had taken
him.
on January 29th. You'll learn that some other curious things were going on in the early morning hours of
Those
January
neutral
29th.
third-party witnesses are
Curious
going to
things
be
that the police
everything
in
for this
case
jury.
utterly failed to investigate. For example, after people left the after-hours party at Brian Albert's house on January 29, Brian Albert claimed that he had no contact with anyone but his wife until he was woken up in the morning. But you will learn that he was ultimately confronted by the fact that his phone records revealed that he had actually placed a phone call to ATF agent Brian Higgins, his
So many
friend,
Brian's.
the same friend who had been at his house earlier that night. And that was at 2:22 in the morning. You'll learn that Brian Higgins called him back 17 seconds later, and they connected 22 seconds on their cell phones. You'll be asked to consider just how long 22 seconds is and what could be said and discussed during that long of a phone call. You will consider that phone call in the context of the other curious
I think they're
things
gonna
that
give
were
him
going
22
on
seconds of
during
silence
the
at some
early
point.
morning hours of January 29th. You will learn about the following in chronological order. 2:12 a.m., Jennifer McCabe arrives at her home. 2:22 a.m., Brian Albert calls Brian Higgins.
This timeline's way better than the
2:22 a.m.,
States.
17 seconds later, Higgins calls him back. And Brian Albert and Brian Higgins are on the phone together for 22 seconds.
What are they talking about?
2:23 a.m., Jennifer McCabe climbs the stairs to her bedroom.
I bet that's from phone data.
2:27 a.m., Jennifer McCabe searches on Google how long to die in the cold.
That timeline was
2:30 a.m.,
really well
plow
done.
driver Brian Loughran confirms there was no body on Brian Albert's front lawn. 3:30 a.m., Brian Loughran confirms that a Ford Edge was parked right where John O'Keefe's body was later found. The Commonwealth will not be able to successfully dispute any of those facts, yet I expect that they will persist in asking you to convict Karen Reed anyway. You will learn that there are other major problems with the Commonwealth's theory. You'll learn that when John O'Keefe was found, he did not look like he had been hit by a car. You'll learn that he looked to have been attacked and beaten up. You'll learn that John O'Keefe was a large 6'2" man who, if positioned behind a Lexus SUV, would have had his torso completely exposed to the rear of that vehicle, including to the taillight. You'll learn that no part of his torso was injured. There was no bruising, no ridges, no scratches, no punctures. You'll learn that his chest and hips and legs were pristine, despite the Commonwealth's contention that he was hit by a 6,000-pound vehicle. The evidence will show that what was not pristine was his right arm. You will take one look at that arm, and you will conclude that a car did not cause those injuries. The injuries to John O'Keefe's arm appear to be consistent with scratch marks and claw marks, marks that make it look as though an animal had attacked his arm. But you won't have to rely just on your common sense when you look at those photos.
Because the evidence
You'll
will
hear
show.
from an expert forensic pathologist who was world-renowned.
So the defense has their own
Who has
pathologist.
personally conducted thousands of autopsies. And he will testify that those marks are consistent with scratch and claw marks and bite marks from an animal, including a German Shepherd. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, Brian Albert's family dog, Chloe, was a German Shepherd. You'll learn that Brian Albert has admitted that this dog is not good around strangers. You'll learn that on January 29th of 2022, John O'Keefe would have been a stranger to that dog. And you'll learn that Chloe had been the beloved family dog for the Alberts for 7 years.
Had been.
The Albert family loved Chloe. But strangely, as we discuss this dog today, the Albert family doesn't have its beloved Chloe anymore. You'll learn that Brian Albert was called to testify before the grand jury regarding this matter in April of 2022.
But the dog was
And
rehomed.
that he did
Chat,
testify
the dog was
about his
rehomed out of
German Shepherd,
state.
Chloe, during that grand jury testimony.
He's going to leave
And
that
you learn that
hanging.
not long after that
I'll
testimony,
close the loop for y'all.
Brian Albert and his family rehomed
Yep.
their beloved family dog. They gave away their family dog, and Chloe, the German Shepherd, is therefore now gone. Now,
Isn't that interesting?
Commonwealth will try to take your attention away from all of these troubling facts and try to persuade you not to consider their shocking lack of investigation of anyone else, not to consider John O'Keefe's injuries, not to consider the fact that multiple people left the residence and saw no body, not to consider the fact that the snowplow driver was specifically looking at 2:30 a.m. and there was no body there, not to consider the fact that two people in the house were communicating at 2:22 a.m. but denied speaking to each other for 22 seconds.
Isn't that weird?
And not to consider the fact that one of their witnesses, who was also present at the home, was unusually curious at 2:27 a.m. about how long it would take for someone to die in the cold. The Commonwealth will instead try to persuade you that Karen Reed supposedly had a motive to kill John O'Keefe because they were not getting along. You'll hear about their trip to Aruba over New Year's Eve and that Karen was upset that John had been flirting with another woman. And you will hear that Karen considered exploring her options after that trip, which led her to a get-together at one point with ATF federal agent
Brian Higgins.
although that never went anywhere. But you'll also hear that in January of 2022, after the Aruba trip, and not long before January 28th and 29th, John O'Keefe was making long-term plans with Karen, including a family trip with her and the kids, and also another trip with Karen and another couple for months into the future. And you'll see video of how John and Karen were interacting on the night in question. You'll see for yourself how they looked at each other from the video at the waterfall that night. Nobody who saw them that night saw anything wrong. There was nothing wrong. I mean, like any couples, occasionally they would bicker or disagree, but you will hear zero evidence of any domestic violence in that home whatsoever. John never raised a hand in anger toward Karen, and Karen never raised a hand
Where
in anger
did that come
toward John.
from?
That simply wasn't who they are.
Did anyone
You will
insinuate
conclude
that?
the notion that Karen Reed chose the start of a snowstorm to suddenly become violent out of the blue for the first time and intentionally kill her boyfriend by hitting him with her car and leaving him there with a house full of people inside is patently
A house full of
ridiculous.
cops inside.
You will also learn that what's not ridiculous is that someone, not Karen Reed, ambushed John O'Keefe. Somebody probably didn't mean to kill him, but somebody went too far. You'll learn that Trooper Proctor failed
That's
to
argumentative.
investigate motives that other people had to harm John O'Keefe. You'll learn that Proctor failed to investigate anything or anyone who was in the Albert residence that night. You'll learn that he failed to investigate the antagonistic relationship between members of the Albert family and John O'Keefe. You'll learn that apparently nobody investigates the Albert family of Canton. Remember, on day one, Trooper Proctor was asked whether the homeowner, Brian Albert, would catch a lot of grief. And Trooper Proctor himself said it. Nope. The homeowner's a Boston cop, too. So, folks, the trial is now about to start, and the witnesses are about to start testifying. On behalf of Karen Reed, I ask that you do two things during this trial.
The nope.
First, I ask that you pay attention to all of the evidence.
That nope is going to be tough to get
The way
around.
trials work, the prosecution gets to present its case first. They conduct their direct examinations first. So we respectfully ask that you wait for us. We will get to cross-examine their witnesses, and you will find that cross-examination is the key that unlocks the truth. Wait for us. You'll be glad that you did.
Good
Second,
opening.
I ask that you keep your eye on the ball here. You have one job and one job only to do during this trial, and that job, quite frankly, is not to solve this case. Your only job
Figure out
during
if the
this
state
trial is to
proves it.
determine whether the Commonwealth, the prosecution, has proven to you each and every element of the crimes they have charged, beyond a reasonable doubt, to a moral certainty. The prosecution will fail to prove this case to a moral certainty. They will fail to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. You will reasonably doubt their case because their theory of the case does not make sense. You will reasonably doubt their case because Karen Reed was framed, and the evidence shows that, despite the fact that the police never ever investigated that angle of this case at all. Because the prosecution will not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty, we will stand before you again at the end of this trial and ask that you find Karen Reed not guilty.
It's a great,
Thank you very much, Ms.
great
Giannetti.
opening statement
Yes.
from the defense. They are now approaching its sidebar. I'm going to zoom since we're behind. To a moral certainty. Is that a Massachusetts thing? Stephen asked. Some of the original colonies have older language that harken more towards the English system. Each has their own distinct jury instructions. Let's see if we can zoom. Oh, are we going to get up to real time? Are we going to be, look at us caught up. That fan is going to make me motion sick. I hate it. All right, let's talk about opening statements real quick since everybody's at sidebar. I imagine they're going to take a morning break, let the jury use the restroom, and then get into their witnesses. Though that said, it is noon local time for the court, Eastern Standard Time. I wonder if they will take a lunch break. Let's talk about these opening statements real quick, and then I'll answer some questions if we can. I hate that fan. I miss the seal of a state or the Commonwealth. I miss a clock. Like this fan, man. Can we do something different tomorrow? Opening statements have concluded in the Karen Reed trial. I found the Commonwealth's opening statement to be a bit hard to follow. They got very into the weeds of who was where and what. They jumped around in time quite a lot between the night of the murder, a trip to Aruba earlier in January over New Year's, back to the morning that the victim was found, back to when people were at the bar. And it was incredibly difficult to follow. Even when they pointed out statements made by the defendant, they weren't punctuated. The statements by the defendant saying to EMS, I hit him, asking others, could I have hit him? Did he get hit by a snowplow? None of those were well punctuated and were hard to follow. The defense opening statement started with Karen Reed was framed and then laid out with some argument, but wasn't objected to, their theory of the case, including details about this case that were shocking to me, including the fact that they have the lead investigator's personal cell phone. Well, at the very, very beginning of this investigation, they argue that the evidence, they state that the evidence will show that the lead investigator was texting his friends from high school about this investigation. And they say that the texts from the lead investigator, Trooper Proctor's phone, will show that somebody said, well, the homeowner is going to catch some heat. And the lead investigator's response to that was nope. They also talk about the fact that the house party where the victim had been was a house owned by a cop. There were a bunch of cops at the party. And when they learned that there was a fellow officer out in the snow in the morning, those from inside the house didn't go outside. Didn't go outside. Didn't go to help. They're all trained in EMS. They're all first responders. Didn't go outside the house to help. They also argue that if the state's theory of the case is true, and if Karen Reed had struck Officer O'Keefe and left him in the snow, everyone leaving the home would have seen a 6'2" dude sprawled out on the lawn. And the state said you will hear that under the victim's body was his cell phone and grass. They never said that his cell phone showed he didn't go into the house, but they said under his body was grass and the cell phone, showing that the state, the Commonwealth, believes that when Officer O'Keefe was struck, it was before there was a lot of snow. Well, the defense is saying, well, if that's true, how did everyone leave the house and not see anyone? And the snowplow driver didn't see anyone. Nobody saw anybody. How can that be? How can that timing line up? More stunningly, a detail I had never seen about this case is they say that the lead investigator was going through the defendant Karen Reed's phone without a search warrant, looking for nudes of the defendant. Are you fucking kidding me? That's the lead investigator they're going to put up on the stand to talk about this case? That is going to be a interesting cross-examination, because are you kidding me? I mean, maybe it's a little more clear now why there's a internal affairs investigation into the lead investigator, which isn't going to come up during this trial. But are you kidding? Are you kidding me? The defense did an excellent job of highlighting the fuckery. The defense did an excellent job of asking the jury to wait. They said, wait for us. Wait for our evidence. The state is going to go first, but wait for the defense case, and asked everyone to keep an open mind, which is what I'm trying to do. But after that opening statement, my mind has a lot of questions. Like, I got a lot of questions, and the defense did their job. I think the defense pointed out all of the areas that the jury needs to ask questions. So as we get into each witness, ladies and gentlemen, humans and law nerds of the chat, I imagine that as we get into each witness, the things the defense said in opening are going to stick into your mind. And you're going to say, but what about this? But what about that? But what about this? And I would imagine that that is what the jury will do too. The state did not make a compelling theory of the case in their opening, and maybe they won't. But as each of those witnesses come up, everybody's going to wait to find out if Trooper Proctor was digging through the defendant's personal cell phone looking for nudes. That's what we're all going to want to know. And so the state's case has already had the defense poke holes that we're all going to sit here being like, I'm going to need you to explain some shit. The defense did an excellent job in their opening. That cannot be understated. Could a strong prosecution opening have gone a little bit further? I don't know. But what I saw from the 18,000 of you in the chat when the defense opening started is all of you went, what now? What now? After the prosecution, you know what this chat was saying? I'm lost. What did he say? What did he mean? What did she say? Who, what? And when the defense started, all of you went, I'm awake. What? You said, what now? You said he did what now? No. And then I saw all of the motions for code red. All of you went, you said what now? And what the jury doesn't know that we know is that there is a federal investigation into this entire prosecution. And maybe now it's a little bit more clear why. Because I didn't dig into it very deeply. Why? Because I wanted to go into this case as a juror. And when I went into this case as a juror, for all of you who went into this case not knowing what was happening in this case, are you just like, what did he just say? Because that's where I'm at right now. I have questions. And I am so glad I came into this case with the briefest of overviews, because I didn't know what the state's theory, what the Commonwealth's theory was by the end of their closing. But you know what I know real well? What the defense is saying happened. And I am stunned. I am stunned. How did they get to Trooper Proctor's personal cell phone? What did they learn? And I know they didn't even get into everything. I am absolutely stunned by the defense's opening. That was a fantastic opening statement. And I think it left all of you with quite a lot of questions. I'll put up a poll in a minute. We're going to get to some Q&A. I can't with this fan. I'm so invested in this case. I'm so invested in this case. How is the state going to prove this? Like, what are they going to do? I can't imagine being a prosecutor sitting there having to try to explain, I wouldn't, an investigating officer searching a female defendant's phone for nudes. Like, Emily, are you going to be able to move on from that? Nope. Nope, probably not. Nope, probably not. Nope, probably not. Nope, probably not. Probably not going to be able to move on from it. Because seriously. But they're trying to show that this investigation was biased from the beginning. And while the nudes are something that I am absolutely disgusted by, and I'm not going to be able to move past the fact that everyone left the house from the party that night and didn't see a 6'2" man dressed in dark clothes, because we're going to see video of what the victim was wearing earlier in the night, didn't see him and do anything. And the fact that a fellow law enforcement officer was notified that there was a officer down in his yard and did nothing. Those two facts, those two things are telling. Very, very telling to me. So we'll see. All right, let's get into your questions. That was fucking wild. But I think their theory, I highlighted it. This is what I think the defense theory of the case is. Don't ask me what the theory of the case is for the prosecution. I don't know. I made a note that said the defense had a great timeline because they backed up the timeline to conversations that were not disclosed, to a Google search that was deleted, to the fact that the tow truck driver didn't, or the snowplow driver didn't see anybody. The defense did a great timeline. What else did I note? Where did I took a lot more notes during the defense opening than the state opening because I couldn't even follow what the state was saying. But what they called Karen Reed was a convenient outsider. And I think that's what we're going to see their theory of the case develop into, is that Karen Reed has been framed, that's the word they used, because she is a convenient outsider. I'm hearing noise from the courtroom. We're going to get to Q&A. No, fuck that fan. Okay. Emily, it's day one of an 8-week trial and you have no patience. I'm so mad about the nudes. I can't.
All right, jurors, we're about to begin the evidence in this case. And I remind you, I defined for you what the evidence is and what isn't evidence. Please remember that the opening statements of lawyers are not evidence. You're about to hear the evidence starting now.
Ma'am?
So, Mr. Lally, your first witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth will call Mr. Paul O'Keefe to the stand.
Okay.
We're starting with Paul O'Keefe. Adrian, would you wait to do your opening so you can bring up third-party culpability info? Nope. The defense wanted to do their opening so that the jury had questions from the beginning, and they did an excellent job with it. I need to embiggen myself just a little bit.
Right here. Do you solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case now?
Wow, those openings were.
Help you God. Yes, I do. Thank you. You may take the stand.
The defense opening was very persuasive. I mean, it was a little bit of argument, but. So chat, I see you guys asking who this is. Here's the thing. It is the state's job to help us understand who this is and why they matter. It is the state's job to keep these things straight in our minds. And if they're not doing it for us, they're not doing it for the jury. So let's find out together. But this is the state's first witness.
Anytime you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor.
He's like, I'm not ready. My brain hurts after the defense's opening.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Paul O'Keefe, last name O''K''E''E''F''E.
And where do you live, sir?
I live in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived there?
10 years.
And who, if anyone, do you live there with?
My wife, Erin, our 2 children.
And how old are your children?
13 and 10.
And both daughters, is that correct?
Correct.
And how long have you and your wife been together?
Together, 24 years total.
That's
Married
about the same
for
time as me.
17 almost.
We've been married for
What is your wife's name?
22.
Erin?
We've been together
And where did you grow up?
25.
Braintree, Massachusetts.
And what are your parents' names?
My father is John, mother is Margaret.
And did you have any siblings?
2, yes. My sister Kristen.
Oh.
And, brother John.
And what was sort of the order in age as far as the siblings?
My sister was the oldest. My brother was the middle. I'm the youngest, so my sister was 5 years older than me, and my brother was 3.5 years older than me.
So he has lost both of his siblings
And
because he is the victim's youngest brother.
What do you do for work?
I'm in sales for a company, Simmons Industries, which is a manufacturer of plumbing products.
How long have you been doing that?
12 years now.
Does your wife work as well?
She does.
What does she do?
She's in marketing. She works for a mechanical contractor out of Randolph.
And about how long has she been doing that?
She's been with her company for a year and a half now. Before that, she had a job working out of Boston for about 13 years.
And your brother, John. Did you call him John, or was there a nickname or anything else that you?
Yeah, I feel for him too.
We all called him Johnny, especially if you're a family.
His sister, for those of you asking in the chat, passed away from cancer.
What did Johnny do for?
The victim in this case, Officer O'Keefe, was the guardian for his niece and nephew, his sister's children. His sister passed away from cancer. The sister's husband, the brother-in-law, passed away from a heart attack shortly thereafter. John O'Keefe, the victim in this case, then took custody of his niece and nephew. When John O'Keefe was killed, the niece was in 8th grade, the nephew was younger. So this is the victim's youngest brother. He has lost both of his siblings. This family's been through unthinkable tragedy. They deserve answers to what happened to Officer O'Keefe. They deserve answers. And if the answers are that this was a fucked investigation, they deserve that answer. If it was that Karen Reed did this, they deserve that answer. This family deserves answers.
Boston police.
And they deserve dignity, and they deserve a good investigation.
16 years.
And within the Boston police, where specifically did he sort of work?
He started in Hyde Park, Mattapan area, which I believe is E18, and transferred over to Dorchester, which is C11.
The victim.
And then downtown Boston for in the SOAR unit, which is the sex offender registry unit.
And when was it about that he started with the sex offender registry?
So after my sister had passed away in 2013, her husband passed away 2 months after that. My brother he took on the responsibility of raising our niece and nephew. And so the Boston police, to ensure that he was safe and protected, moved him to that unit in 2014.
So he wasn't in the field.
And I'm sorry to ask you this, but your sister passed away in 2013, is that correct?
Correct.
And what did your sister Kristen pass away from?
She had an aggressive brain tumor, which is called glioblastoma.
And about how much time was it between the time that she sort of received the diagnosis to her passing?
5.5 months.
Some of this isn't relevant.
You mentioned that you had a brother-in-law.
But they're not going to
husband,
object.
Is that correct?
Correct. Stephen Furbush, yes.
And when was it that he passed in relation to?
2 months later, which was January 12th, 2014.
And they, and by they I mean Kristen and Stephen Furbush, they had two children, is that correct?
Yes, 2 children, Kaylee and Patrick.
Which one is older?
Kaylee's the older. Patrick's a couple years younger than her, about 3 years.
They're going to be witnesses.
How old are they now?
Kaylee is 16 and Patrick is 13.
And
which are basically the ages of my kids.
So initially, when your sister Kristen passed away, what was sort of the family's plan as far as Kaylee and Patrick were concerned?
Can you repeat that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So initially, when your sister
Not an easy
Kristen
question.
passed away and her husband Stephen was still alive, what was sort of the initial plan as far as with reference to the children?
We were kind of in scramble mode to figure out, how we were going to move forward.
I imagine that was.
My wife and I had talked
wild.
about having the kids come live with us. We had 2 small children at the time. 3 and 8 months were my children. We didn't have a, large enough house to take on 2 other children, so
kids.
My brother stepped in, moved into the house in Canton, and raised them for 8 years.
And so, around this time of 2013,
14.
Sister Kristen and her husband Stephen's children, about how old were they?
14.
This time that Johnny sort of took over.
Oh no,
Kaylee
13.
Kaylee was 6.
I'm wrong.
Patrick was 3.
Now,
I can't
when your brother
even
Johnny
imagine.
What if any sort of legal relationship did he have?
No,
with
I was
his
wrong.
Niece and nephew, Kaylee and Patrick?
He was made a legal guardian.
And where did he move from, and where did he move to when he assumed that role?
So he was living in Dorchester.
Chat, for those of you asking, the brother-in-law had a heart attack 2 months after his wife passed from an aggressive cancer.
In a condo. he was living by himself, so he pretty much moved into my sister and brother-in-law's house in Canton. Lived there for, I want to say, 4 years until sold the house and bought a different house, which is also located in Canton.
Now, the initial house that your sister Kristen and her husband Stephen lived in with Kaylee and Patrick, about how long had they been living there before your brother Johnny moved in?
I don't know if that matters.
They were probably there for
or
5 or 6
relevant
years.
to anything.
Prior to that, where had your sister Kristen and either of the children lived prior to moving into that house?
Yeah, so they,
don't know if any
Christian
of
and
that's
Steve
relevant.
actually moved in with Johnny in Dorchester when Kaylee was just a baby. Lived with him for approximately a year before they bought their home in Canton.
Now, you mentioned that at some point your brother bought a second house in Canton and moved in there with the kids. Is that right?
Okay.
Correct.
And
Around what time was that?
I want to say
any of this
2017 or 2018 timeframe.
And they lived there up and through sort of January 28th, 29th of 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, around that particular time of January 2022, about how often did you see your brother Johnny and the kids, Kaylee and Pat?
I would say probably every other week, twice a month.
And your brother in particular, how often would you communicate with him during that time?
Communicate regularly, mostly through text messaging, a couple days a week, I would say.
Now, over the course of time, you said about 8 years or so that Johnny had sort of custody of Kaylee and Patrick, correct?
Correct.
And over that course of
that part
time,
matters.
About how many relationships and well, let me phrase this question first. About how many long-term relationships did your brother Johnny have with women over the course of that time? And before you get to that, if I could just ask you what your definition of long-term
objection, what?
Long-term relationship is, over a year.
And so how many of those types of dating relationships that lasted for at least a year did your brother have during that time that he had the kids?
2.
And who were those 2 individuals?
Amy Fortney and Karen Reed.
And this other individual, Amy, when about was it that your brother dated her?
I'm sure Amy would like to be excluded from all of this.
2016, 2017 timeframe, I think.
And did this other woman that he dated named Amy, did she have children of her own?
Yeah, she had 2 sons.
Now, you mentioned 2, so other than Amy, who was the other one?
Her 2 sons' names are Gabriel and Christian.
I kind of hate
I'm sorry.
that.
In reference to, you mentioned 2 women that your brother had dated for a long-term period, correct?
Yes, correct.
And one of them was the woman Amy that you were just speaking about, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And who was the second one?
Karen Reed.
He said that.
And is Karen Reed someone that you had met through the course of your brother dating her?
Yes.
Just to be clear for the record, do you see Ms. Reed in the courtroom today? Do you identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing?
Yep, she is seated right there between Mr. Yannetti and Mr. Jackson.
Just ask the record to reflect identification of the defendant by the witness.
No objection.
Yes.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, when was it that you first met Karen?
I believe it was Mother's Day, so maybe May of 2020.
Now, prior to that, were you aware of any other time when Ms. Reed and your brother Johnny had dated in the past?
They dated very briefly in 2004.
And had you had occasion to meet her during that brief period where they dated in 2004?
I did not meet her back then, no.
And so the first time you met her would have been sometime in the spring of 2020, correct?
Correct.
And what was your understanding as far as when they had reconnected or gotten back together in reference to when you met her?
They reconnected. I believe my brother reached out to her in March of 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. I think he reached out to her via Facebook Messenger and then, text.
And they resumed some kind of relationship, and you had occasion to meet or see Karen Reed over the course of hanging out with your brother at various occasions, correct?
Correct, yep.
Now, about how often would you see Miss Reed? Would it be the same, more or less than when you saw your brother?
Almost the same, maybe a little less. If my brother was just him and I or his friends, but for the most part, he was with Karen.
And
this is going to get to nature of the relationship at some point.
Living arrangements with regard to Miss Reed and your brother.
And living arrangements.
She has her own home in Mansfield, Massachusetts. She would stay at my brother's house in Canton, I would say 3, maybe 4 nights a week.
Any locals in the chat? What's the difference? How far Mansfield
that would be at your
to
brother's
Canton?
house with both he and your
If
niece.
anybody has
Correct.
any thoughts in the chat, just drop them in.
Now, with regard to, you mentioned that they reconnected sometime around the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And with regard
20 minutes,
your brother
15, 20
and,
minutes. Thanks, Chad.
Defendant Ms. Reed and the children,
Not far.
what was sort of going on as far as school and work with regard to the pandemic, with regard to each of them?
So that was a period of time when schools were closed and kids had to do remote learning. So Kaylee and Patrick were both at home, remote learning, and my brother, didn't have a job where he can work remote, so he had to go into the office. And most of the time, Karen would be at home with the kids during the day while she worked remotely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that your brother had a legal guardianship role with regard
So they
to children, correct?
reconnected.
Correct, yes.
And then she immediately
What, if any,
took over
legal
helping
status
with
or
the
role
kids.
Did the defendant have with regard to the
She was
children?
incredibly
She didn't
kind.
have any.
Now, with regard to your brother and the defendant's relationship, what, if any, conversations did you have with your brother in regard to status of their relationship or any issues in their relationship?
He didn't say too much. If they were arguing, he might, give reference that they were arguing. Didn't really tell me what they were arguing about, but mostly kept that stuff to himself.
What, if anything, did he mention to you as far as reasons for an argument or sort of points of contention?
He didn't like, if she would spend a lot of money on the kids for gifts, or, I know there was some arguments over, what she fed them, whether it's, Dunkin' Donuts or whatnot, but it was.
I'm sorry, doesn't the
Things
state of
along those
Massachusetts
lines.
run on Dunkin'? So,
Now-
wait, so the arguments that they had was that the victim spent too much money, or the defendant spent too much money on the children. Okay. Okay.
What, if any, what if any occasions, as far as they're arguing or anything like that, did you observe personally yourself?
Yeah, I witnessed, so they had rented a house down in Cape Cod. Say that was summer of 2021. I brought my
lovely.
2 daughters down for a couple nights, and I witnessed, one intense fight between the two of them.
And as far as a fight, as you're characterizing that, was that anything physical or just verbal?
No, it was a verbal argument.
And what, if anything, was that verbal argument about?
It's hard to recall. I mean, you know, I guess like typical
Stuff.
couples fighting. There was alcohol had been involved. I recall her complaining that, you know, he wasn't nice to her, or, you know, something to that effect. And I was kind of the referee in that entire situation.
Now, when you make reference to alcohol involved, is that one?
So they
or
were
both?
drinking and they got
both.
into an argument
Both
and
the brother
yelled
and the-
at each other?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Now, if I could turn your attention to New Year's, and specifically New Year's Eve going from 2021 into 2022. Do you recall that time?
I do.
And do you recall where you and your family were for that sort of New Year's celebration?
Yeah, so I was with my wife and her family. We went to Aruba the day after Christmas in celebration of my wife's mother's 70th birthday.
One sec for that siren.
Ms. Tallali, does it make sense that I give an instruction at this point? I'm going to see counsel at sidebar.
Yes, it does. The instruction she's asking about is this incident in Aruba. I'm going to zoom just a little bit. Not the fan, not the fan, not the fan, not the fan, not the fan. Anywhere but the fan, not the fan. All right, the audience is better than the fan. I'm going to zoom and see if we catch up to real time. Look at that timing. They're back from sidebar.
So during that New Year's Eve, you were in
The sidebar.
Aruba for your wife's mother's 70th birthday, correct?
Correct.
And was your brother, Johnny, was he also in Aruba around that same time frame?
Yes.
And your resort and your brother's resorts, where were they in relation to each other?
They were pretty much on opposite sides of the island.
And at any point in time when you were in Aruba, did you see your brother at any point?
Unfortunately, we did not.
Wait, you were both
Now,
vacationing
you
in
mentioned that
Aruba.
you were
You were
there with-
both vacationing in Aruba for New Year's, and you didn't see each other. It's not very big. I'm just okay.
With your wife and your children, is that correct?
Curious.
Correct.
Okay. And do you know who your brother was in Aruba with around that same time?
He was with Karen Reed and brought the kids. So Kaylee and Patrick were with him. They were also with a large group, many other couples and families.
Do you know who was sort of the primary organizer of that group that your brother was with?
Yes, a friend of ours, Laura Sullivan.
Though I guess if
And
you're there
how
for a
did you know
70th
Laura
birthday, I could see your wife being like, "We always spend time with your
I
family."
knew Laura through my brother.
Speculation.
She had dated my brother's partner and one of his best friends, Pat Rogers.
Law enforcement partner.
And did Ms. Sullivan and Mr. Rogers have a child together?
Yes, and a boy.
And at some point, did Mr. Rogers pass away?
Yes.
What was sort of the relationship between your brother and Ms. Sullivan in relation to Mr. Rogers' child?
Johnny was, so she has a son, Benjamin, who Johnny is godfather to.
And sort of towards the end of your stay in Aruba, with regard to the pandemic, what, if anything, happened to you or any other member of the family?
So my older daughter tested positive for COVID. So her and I.
Oh, well, that
kinda
might
got
explain why
left
they didn't see each
behind,
other much.
Stayed for an extra 3-4 days, I believe.
So after you returned from Aruba, at some point, were you and your brother trying to make plans to connect or to hang out or see each other at some point in January of 2022?
Yes, we were actually planning on getting together on January 29th.
And do you recall what day of the week that was?
That was a Saturday.
And why was it Saturday? Why were you sort of targeting Saturday as a new point?
A weekend, no work. Kids didn't really have much on the schedule.
By that you mean your kids as well as
Correct.
your nephew?
Yes.
And then what, if anything, occurred with reference to those plans as far as them coming to fruition or not?
A big snowstorm hit the area, and we said, maybe it's probably better if we just stay home and off the roads. So we kind of canceled getting together the day before.
So initially had a meeting for the 29th.
That
but
hurts my
canceled it the day
heart
before
for
on the
him.
28th.
Correct.
So this snowstorm that you were talking about that was coming in, is that something that you and your brother were aware of prior to that day it happened?
Yes.
And was that something you learned of? Where did you learn about that?
The news?
So sort of all over the news, is that fair to say?
Correct, yes.
And as far as did either your children, or John's children, for lack of a better term, niece and nephew, were there any sort of planned activities for that day that got canceled because of the weather, or no?
Well, that's leading.
On that Saturday, the 29th?
I mean, it doesn't really matter
I mean, I think
much,
everything was pretty much canceled. I don't know anything specific. We had,
all the shit
my
was
daughters
canceled.
had basketball on Friday night, the night before, but we didn't really have any plans for the children on Saturday.
Now, turning your attention to that day of the 28th, so the day before that, that was a Friday, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And you mentioned that your daughters had basketball that evening, is that correct?
Correct.
And what, if any, role do you have in regard to your daughter's basketball?
I coach both of their teams.
What, if any, relevance does it have that he
And, so
coaches
you coached 2
basketball?
games that Friday night?
Correct.
What if what?
And, about what time do you know that if you know, did you sort of get home from all of that?
First game was at 6, second game was at 7:15, so we got home 8:30ish.
And your wife was with you at both of your daughter's games?
Correct.
And when you got home, had the snow that had been predicted, had it started at that point where you were?
I noticed the first flurries sometime between 10:30 and 11 p.m.
And if you know, approximately what time did you go to bed then?
Right around probably midnight.
And your wife, Erin, did she go to bed same time as you?
I think she went to bed a little before me, yes.
Now, earlier in that day, that Friday, the 28th, what, if any, conversation by any means did you have with your brother John?
My last communication with him was on a group text exchange that included myself, Karen Reed, and my mother.
Karen's in the
And he
family group
was,
chat.
Excited because our niece Kaylee had gotten accepted to Bishop Fee in high school. So he was happy, proud dad moment. And then, Patrick's national math scores came back, and he scored extremely high. So he was extremely proud of Patrick that day as well.
So we had sort of sent, your brother John had sort of sent that to the group, which included yourself, your mother, and Miss Reed.
Correct.
And your niece Kaylee, as far as what grade was she in, and what grade was she going into as far as that application to?
Well, she was in 8th
Yeah,
grade.
so she was 8th grade going into 9th, freshman year in high school.
Now, you go to bed at some point in the evening of the 28th, and you woke up on the 29th. Do you recall what woke you up on that morning?
Yes, my mother called me at 6:40 a.m.
Oh, God.
Is that something typical?
This is
No.
going to make me cry.
She called and just said, something happened to your brother. They found him in the snow, and they took him to the hospital.
And which hospital was it?
Good Samaritan in Brockton, Massachusetts.
And at that point, did you, or what, if any, other sort of information did you have as to what had happened to your brother?
I really didn't know much until I got to the hospital. While I was at the hospital, my cousin works 911 dispatch, so she came down because she had heard. And the only thing I was able to get was that, he was cold and they needed to warm him up. But didn't have much information other than that.
So you get that information from your cousin when you get to the hospital, correct?
Correct.
That cousin, what was her name?
I can't imagine.
Susanna Hensley.
If I could take you back to just prior, so you initially get the phone call from your mother, Peggy O'Keefe, is that correct?
Correct.
This poor
That's about
family.
6:40 in the morning.
Correct.
And your wife Erin is with you at that time, is that correct?
Correct.
And so you get that call, and sort of what is it that you do, or sort of how quickly are you out the door?
I jumped out of bed, got changed, brushed my teeth, and I was out the door.
I imagine.
And you drove
That
from
he
your house
was-
to where?
Yes, I drove myself from my house to the hospital, Good Samaritan Hospital.
So,
And what kind of car did you have at that point, if you know?
A Toyota 4Runner.
That's a SUV? Is
That's
that-
an SUV, yes.
What color was that?
Black.
And as far as the road conditions, visibility, sort of when
That's
you're
why he was asking
driving
about the
from
car.
West Bridgewater to Brockton, what, if anything, did you observe as far as how the roads were?
The driving was very poor that morning and just continued to get worse throughout the day. So it took me longer than usual, than it typically would to drive that distance.
Now, as far as your parents were concerned, did they come to the Good Samaritan Hospital as well?
Yes, our friend Kerry Roberts picked them up in Braintree and
yeah,
brought them
the road
to the hospital
conditions
in
matter
Brockton.
because the
When you
state
say your friend Kerry
will
Roberts,
argue that's why
how
there
do
was
you
a
know Kerry Roberts?
delay in finding
So
evidence.
we grew up in Braintree. She grew
And
up in Braintree as well.
Part of the issue is seeing the
2
victim.
years older than me. Knew my brother. They went to homecoming together one year. And she also resides in Canton.
So she was someone who had grown up with you and your brother, was friends with you, and also friends with your brother, correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as your arrival at the Good Samaritan, who arrived first? Was it you, your parents, or something else?
I got there first.
And about how long was it, if you know, between the time that you got there and the time that your parents arrived there with Ms. Roberts?
Probably about 45 minutes.
And when you arrived at the Good Samaritan Medical Center, where within the facility did you sort of go?
Emergency room waiting area, lobby.
And at some point, did you, after your parents arrived, did you move from
Literally one of the
from
worst
waiting
places
room
on
area
earth.
to somewhere else within the hospital?
So when my parents arrived, they brought us, in the double doors into like a little family sitting room.
And
That's
about how
not a
long
good
was
sign.
it that you were in the family sitting room before you went somewhere else?
So we were in that waiting room. Doctor and nurse came in and told us that all their efforts to save my brother were unsuccessful and that he had passed away. And then asked if we wanted to go see him, in which we said yes. So we left that room and walked down the hallway to his hospital room.
And I imagine he's going to be asked about the condition of his
And that
brother
doctor
when he
you
saw
spoke to,
him.
do you recall what the doctor's name was?
Dr. Rice.
And when you say that we went down to the room where your brother was that everyone in the group?
It was myself and my parents, yes.
And Ms. Roberts, did she go as well, or did she?
No, she stayed out in the waiting area.
And as you were making your way down to the room where they had your brother, what if anything occurred along the way?
So I noticed Karen Reed was there. She was being restrained by hospital employees, and she was, screaming out to us, asking if he was alive.
Is that something that she screamed out once, more than once, or something else?
Several times.
Now, at some point, you went into the room where your brother was, correct?
Correct.
And can you describe to the jury sort of what you saw as far as your brother was concerned?
He was pretty banged up. He had his eyes had swelled up. He had a breathing tube in, well, the mask anyway. Blood come down his nose, blood come down his mouth. But what really stood out to me was, the eyes. It was almost as if like there were ping pong balls under his eyelids. They were that swollen.
Now, in addition to what you observed as far as his eyes,
He is
what,
doing a
if any,
very
other
good
sort
job of holding it
clues did
together,
you observe
testifying
on any
about
other part
this.
of your brother's body?
I noticed
Just awful.
some markings on his arm. Didn't look at his lower torso area at all because he was covered by a sheet. So most of the injuries that we observed was to the head area and face area.
And when you say his arm, do you recall whether that was one arm, both arms, or which arm in particular?
He had markings on his right arm. I didn't notice anything on the other side.
You spent some time privately as a family with your brother, and at some point you left, is that correct?
Yes, I would estimate we were probably in the room with him for probably 20 minutes until we left.
And after about that 20 minutes, you come back out to the hallway, and where are you going?
We went back to the waiting area, trying to figure out, can we leave? Do we leave? So yes, we left. My mother drove with me. My father drove with Kerry Roberts. We went from the hospital at Good Samaritan in Brockton back to my brother's house in Canton.
And if I could just take you back for a moment. So as you exit the room where your brother is and you come back out in the hallway, what, if anything, occurred at that point?
Again, we saw Karen Reed being restrained by hospital employees, screaming the same things: "Is he alive? Is he alive? Is he alive?"
You, at any point, either before or after, respond to any of that screaming that you heard from the defendant?
I actually blew her a kiss.
Now, as far as your relationship with the defendant, Ms. Reed, prior to January 29th, 2022, how would you characterize it?
I thought we had a good relationship. I held her in very high regard. I thought she was a good influence on my niece and nephew. I appreciated all the help that she was providing to my brother with the kids. We'd go out together as couples a couple times. She became very friendly with my wife, but I'd say overall we had a good relationship.
As far as those positive feelings that you had in relation to the defendant prior to January 29th, 2022, had you expressed those to either the defendant or any member of her family?
Yes. So Christmas Eve of 2021 was the first time I met her parents. My brother hosted Christmas Eve at his house. I met Mr. and Mrs. Reed. I offered to help Mrs. Reed
Chad, I will be
carry
right back.
some
I'm not leaving you for long.
things in from her car.
But
And as we were
I didn't
walking to
take
the
a break
car,
when
I
you
said,
did.
I just want to tell you I think your daughter's great. I think very appreciative of what she's done for the kids and helping my brother.
Now, turning back to that day of January 29th, you go back out to the waiting area, is that correct?
Yes.
And what, if anything, happened? What did you see or speak to when you got out there?
I saw her father, Bill Reed, come into the hospital.
Okay, I
He
need to
was
know what
picking up
happens.
Karen as we
And then I'm
were
going.
pretty much exiting the hospital to head back to Canton.
And did you have any conversation with him?
I did not.
Now, you indicated that you drove with your mother back to Meadows Ave where your brother lived, is that correct?
That's correct.
And Ms. Roberts drove with your father back to the same location, is that correct?
That is correct.
And as far as your understanding sort of on the drive back, where were the kids? Where was Kaylee and Patrick?
Okay, now I'm going.
So Kaylee was picked up by Mike Camerano, who's Kaylee's best friend's father. Patrick was at a sleepover the night before, so he was still with the family at the house where he slept the night before.
Now, you mentioned that the drive from your house from West Bridgewater to Brockton was somewhat difficult, correct?
Very difficult.
How would you characterize the drive from Brockton to your brother's house in Canton?
I mean, at one point I said to my mother, I don't know if we're going to make it back. Visibility was terrible. Couldn't see the roads. We made it back. It was just very, very difficult. Probably the worst driving conditions I've driven in, as far as weather.
And so then, at some point, you and your vehicle, Ms. Roberts, and hers, and your parents, you arrived at your brother's house in Canton, correct?
That's correct.
You know about what time of day that was?
It was mid-morning, so maybe between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning.
And was there anybody present at the house when you arrived there?
No.
And at some point, did other people come over, as far as specifically I'm asking about the children?
Yes, so Kaylee was dropped off shortly after we arrived. And then a little while after that, Patrick was dropped off from his sleepover.
And at some point, you were
All right, still talking about the
tasked
kids.
with informing the children what happened to your brother, correct?
Correct.
At some point after you left the hospital in Brockton, what, if any, conversation or what, if any, phone calls did you receive in relation to the defendant, Ms. Reed?
Karen Reed called me, asked me if it was okay to come over to see the kids, and I said sure.
So I had to.
How
I've
long
been streaming
that phone call went on for?
almost 3 hours.
It was
Some days.
quick phone call,
Just need to go to the bathroom.
maybe a minute. Like I said, she just asked if she could come over, and I said sure. And then she arrived at the house.
Art by Julie,
No,
no.
shortly
Carrie Roberts
thereafter.
is not the one that was Googling.
When you initially arrived at the house, along with your parents and Ms. Roberts and her vehicle, what, if any, other vehicles did you observe sort of in the driveway?
Roberts is a family friend of the victim's family.
I only noticed, I think, my brother's car. I mean, I don't even recall seeing any other cars. I mean, there could have been a car in the garage, but I didn't notice, really. Nothing stands out.
What kind of car did your brother have?
Chevy Traverse,
What color was that, if you know?
gray.
And if you recall, when you first sort of arrived there, where was that vehicle parked in relation to the drive?
I believe it was the right side of the driveway, all the way down to the end of the drive, like the top of the driveway.
Now, you had the phone call with the defendant. You indicate it's fine for her to come over. You know about how long it was
So he talked to
after receiving
Karen.
that phone call and when Ms. Reed arrived there?
20 to 30 minutes, maybe.
And when she arrived at your brother's house, who, if anyone, was she with?
She was with her father.
And at some point, was there anyone else from her family that came over the house that morning as well?
Her brother and his wife showed up shortly after she arrived with her father, yes.
And how many cars, if you know, come in between sort of the...
They
a
each
lot of
took
cars.
separate vehicles, so 2 cars arrived.
And Miss Reed's vehicle, do you know where that vehicle was in relation to your brother's house at that time?
It was either in the driveway or in the garage. I'm not positive.
Okay. So fair to say it was at the house, correct?
It was at the house, yes.
So between the Reed family, there's 3 vehicles at your brother's house now, correct?
Correct.
Now,
And chat, she did not live there. She stayed there quite a
the
lot.
Defendant, you mentioned that you had met her father before on Christmas Eve, is that right?
Correct.
Had you met her brother or brother's wife prior to that day?
No.
And you were in the house when they arrived, is that correct?
When Karen and her father arrived, I was shoveling the walkway out front.
And
He was just trying to handle stuff.
in total, about
That's
how
me.
much time was the defendant at house that morning when she came in?
I would probably say about 30 minutes.
Me not processing things and just doing things.
And at that point, when the defendant arrived, was either Kaylee or Patrick or both home at that time?
Yes, Kaylee had come home first, and then Patrick had come home. So I think Patrick may have come home while they were there.
And you mentioned when they arrived, you were out shoveling sort of the front walk, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when they arrived, did you go in the house with them, or did you continue shoveling, or something else?
I continued shoveling for a very short period of time, and went in the house like pretty much right after they did.
And when you got in the house, what was it sort of that you were doing at that time?
I mean, we had just told Kaylee what had happened.
Fuck.
And we were waiting for Patrick to get home, so we were kind of just congregated in the kitchen.
When you say
How do you tell an
exactly what you're talking
Sorry, myself, my mother, my father.
how do you tell an 8th grader they've lost another
Was Miss Roberts still there, or has she gone home?
guardian, another family member?
I don't recall.
And so, in addition to yourself, your mother, and your father, Miss Reed, her father, any other sort of members of her family, where were they within the house at that time?
So mainly the kitchen at first. When Patrick came home, we kind of took him to like the side
This
room
one's
where the kids
so
hang out.
Surreal.
Talked to him in that room, and then we were in the kitchen. Then Miss Reed and her father went upstairs.
And when you sat down with Patrick to tell him what had happened to your brother, who, if anyone else, was with you at that point?
Karen Reed.
And at some point subsequent to that, you went back to the kitchen, correct?
Yes.
And where was it that the defendant and her father went?
Upstairs into the bedroom.
And if you know, about how long were they in the upstairs area of the house?
I would say 10 to 15 minutes.
And them as they came down the stairs?
Yeah, so I was on the phone a few times. So I didn't watch them walk upstairs, but I saw them come downstairs, turn the corner at the bottom of the stairs. She had some of her belongings that she had taken from the bedroom.
And where did she go with those belongings?
They left. Like I said, they were probably there for 30 minutes. They got in their cars and drove back to Dighton, Massachusetts.
And when you say got back in their cars, you mentioned 3 cars that had been there in the driveway or in the area of the house, correct?
Correct.
When the defendant left, how many of those cars remained?
0.
And as far as the weather conditions that you had mentioned that existed at the time that you drove from the hospital in Brockton to your brother's home in Canton, what, if any, improvement occurred with the weather during that time frame?
None.
So essentially the same, is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was still, the conditions were still poor.
Now, with respect to Miss Reed's vehicle, did you know what kind of vehicle Miss Reed had?
A Lexus SUV. I don't know the actual model.
Mr. Lally, that clock is actually wrong. It's just about 1 o'clock, so is this a good place to take a break?
Perfectly fine. Yes.
All right. All right, jurors, it's the luncheon break. We'll break for an hour. We'll be here ready to go no later than 2 o'clock.
All right, please.
All right, I guess it's lunch.
Put them on your chair.
All right. Lunch break. Freaking fan. It sounds like court. We're hearing the court noises. For those of you that are new here, hi. I do take a lunch break while lunch breaks. So I will be redirecting to a new stream We will start that stream up at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern, whatever time that is, an hour from now, wherever you may be. Do the lawyers eat much over lunch? No. Does the defendant have a lot of time for lunch over lunch? No. The defendant is out of custody and will probably eat somewhere in the courthouse with her lawyers. All right. It is the lunch break. Joe Jersey asked a question. Brittany settled with yeeted. Yes, that happened, I think, on Friday. I will be covering it on the podcast, not today. So let's take a swoop and summarize here real quick. At the end of the morning of day one of the Karen Read trial, or day one of evidence, the state, the Commonwealth, I'll get it eventually. We've got 8 weeks. The Commonwealth and the defense did their openings, and then we got to the first witness for the Commonwealth, who is the youngest brother of victim John O'Keefe. He has testified about his brother's background, his job, how he became the primary caregiver for his niece and nephew, who will be witnesses later in the trial. He talked about his relationship with Karen Read, the family's relationship with Karen Read, the interactions the day that the victim died at the hospital and later on in the day. And then the court took the lunch break at 1 p.m. local time for the court. We will get back into more conversation about what unfolded after the victim died and the rest of that day. So that's where we're at, again, the end of the morning session of day one. I'm going to go through and answer a few questions, and then I'm going to take a break for lunch as well. We have lots of super chats. I will get to as many as I can. I've already seen some popping into the chat with virulent positions as to guilt and or innocence. The Lawnards, for those of you that are new to watching on my channel, are watching this as a, Lawnard jury. So the jury instructions that the court will give to the jury is to keep an open mind till the close of evidence. The defense has asked everyone to keep an open mind till the close of evidence. I will keep an open mind till the close of evidence. The Lawnards don't have an opinion. No. It is those who are not Lawnards yet, who just don't know that that's not what we do in this chat. I am sure that there are chats all across the internet today who have very strong opinions. What I have taken away from this morning is a lot of questions and some side eye. I've got a lot of questions and some side eye. That's what I got. But I do have a very strong verdict as to the fan. Why is there not a seal in this courtroom? Can't we go to the clock? Like, is there anywhere else that's not the fan? So I have very strong feelings about the fan. I have very strong feelings about the defense's opening statement. I thought it was excellent. But as to the rest of it, questions, some side eye. That's where I'm at. I don't know where you guys are at, but I am keeping an open mind. I am not, the clock is wrong though. I know, but it's better than the fan. I am going to be keeping an open mind, again, with questions, curiosity, and some side eye. By the time we get to this lead investigator, I am going to be like, sir, not even that. It's not even that.
Sir, I have so many questions for you, sir. The phone? The text message. Sir, what?
So many questions. I have so many questions. But that's how I'm approaching this case, and that is where I'm at. What are my fan issues? It's making me motion sick. So the video of the fan spinning is making me motion sick. That's my problem. Am I sometimes a delicate flower with motion? Yep. You guys, some of you in the chat are saying the seal is behind the jury. Fair. That's why they can't say it. It makes me motion sick. So that's my problem with the fan. I also, it makes me motion sick. That's where we're at. So Emily, does everything make you motion sick? Sure does. So I know it's not just me. Look, man, the amount of quirks that my brain has, it's a lot. Like, it's just a lot. We gotta just. It is what it is. There's times I have a very hard time watching like body cam footage because it moves around. Police footage from a vehicle, can't do. Blair Witch Project, I can't even talk about it without feeling it in my throat. Like, I get motiony. It is what it is. Wait, let's get to questions. Let's get to questions real quick, and then we are going to get to a lunch break for the mods and for everyone else, and take a break on the stream, which makes it much easier for replays. I see all of your super chats and I thank you. I'm going to try to prioritize the ones that are questioned so I can ask or answer them. Thank you so much, Roy, for the gifted memberships. Daphne, thank you for the compliments on the earrings. I appreciate it. Let's see. Lauren said, Johnny's legal team is back and here to watch this and support you. Love you, Emily. Thank you, Lauren. It's good to see you too. Shane, good to see you. I got the Beyond a Reasonable Doubt and To a Moral Certainty speech in Tennessee. I thought it was odd. Also a great opening. I know Shane just did jury duty here in Tennessee. The moral component is something you don't see in every jurisdiction. It really just depends on the jurisdiction. Tracy said OnlyFans wasn't on my bingo card, right? That's only what they're showing in between these things for sure. Georgia H asked, question, any comment made by the victim's parents? Do they believe there is any suspicious circumstances? I don't know because I have not gone deep diving into the internet about this case. If it comes up in testimony, then we'll know. If it doesn't come up in testimony, then I won't know, or we won't know until we get to the end of trial. So I've seen people being helpful, like Emily, there's a chart over here and this person created this. I need the lawyers to explain it to me so I can understand. If we have to create our own flow chart for who everybody is, the lawyers are not doing their job well. And that's where I'm at with it. I am waiting to tie it together as the lawyers present their evidence because I want to understand where the jury is at, because the jury doesn't get that information. The jury doesn't get outside help. So I do appreciate the help. I love the help. It's like, hey, but this exists. They need, the lawyers need to make it clear to us, the law nerd jury of the internet. So I'm waiting for the lawyers to make it clear, because if we're confused, they're definitely, like, if we're all feeling like, fuck, I need a flow chart, can you imagine how the jury's feeling? And they're sitting in uncomfortable chairs in a courtroom, though I'm told at least this courtroom has air conditioning and the other one doesn't. Emily Outdoors says, take a sip of water every time somebody says Brian. It's a lot of Brians. If this case rested strictly on the defense lawyer's opening statement or the prosecution's opening statement, the defense wins hands down. The defense has made their theory of the case clear. The prosecution has not. That is a massive win for the defense at the beginning of the day, because the defense is opening, 3 days from now, 5 days from now, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, we're still going to be thinking about the questions the defense raised as the prosecution goes through their case. Generally, at the end of the prosecution's case, if you're still sitting here going, I don't know about all that, that's doubt, right? So we need to see where we get. Y'all ain't right said I'm an introvert with 3 friends, way too many people in this case. There are a lot of people. And they got into all of them. Can you do a brief recap after the morning? I did. I did it after this super chat came in, and we will clip those down and put them up on QuickBits. If you are not on the QuickBits channel yet, you can just search it by QuickBits, or it'll be in your in the Law Nerd app, and you will see it from there. And my mom says he needs a lesson from the Daryl Brooks prosecutor. Her exhibits were fabulous. The charts, chef's kiss. Yes, made it very easy. The prosecution in the Daryl Brooks case was like, there's a lot of people. This is what happened. And this is where those people were standing, and they're going to tell you. Fantastic and easy to follow. Laura Lee said the prosecution was beyond difficult to follow, very difficult. I'm glad I have you here to tell me what I just heard. I was trying to process the opening in a way that made sense, and I was struggling. EDB, at some point in this trial, I need to hear the judge say, how do you like them apples? Always JoJo. If it doesn't happen, it will be a miss. We'll just say it here. Chelsea Rama said, Buddy needs a PowerPoint. Looking forward to the razzle dazzle of Karen's New York City lawyers said in the tone of New Mexico prosecution. I think it was a very wise choice for Reed's defense team to let the local defense attorney be the lead defense attorney. It's very, very clever. Smart, good strategy. Clever always sounds different. Anyway, it's very clever. My house runs on Dunkin' coffee, love and laughter. I mean, Massachusetts definitely runs on Dunkin'. I was very surprised when I went to UMass Amherst from California. I was like, interesting. Christy said, as a paralegal, I was the one who made the timelines. Timelines are fantastic and super helpful and great. I spoke at the Tennessee Association of Trial Lawyers on Friday and spoke to a lot of their paralegals. Look, paralegals keep things running. They are truly the nurses of law. They are the ones who make things happen. Bunty said, I'm behind. Why would the brother testify as a witness? The brother witnessed the defendant's behavior, what happened after his brother died, clarified the family members and who everybody was. He kind of sets the stage. That's why. So with all of that, let's see, I'm going to try to get to a few more questions. Did the defense say Proctor was looking for nudes? Samantha? Yeah, I imagine that's going to be one of the headlines today when this case is covered. Yellow Pill said, Your Honor, can you give jury instructions for them to just ignore the entire opening of the defense? I mean, I can try. Yeah, they're definitely not going to get there. Smurfana says, if I'm the victim's family, confused and pissed because fuckery. Yeah. Look, Officer O'Keefe did not die of natural causes. Something happened. He and his family deserve it to be known what happened, which means he deserved a thorough and ethical investigation. And we will see if that's what happened or not. Krista said, my baby girl has her 6-month post-NICU cardiology follow-up today. Thank you for keeping me distracted from my anxiety and stress of trying to keep her twin sis happy while we wait at the doctor forever. You're my comfort watch. It is a hard thing. My teen was a NICU kiddo. Those follow-ups, they seem like they take up your whole life. And then eventually they're not there anymore. And you're like, oh, we're good. So it's a lot. But after you get past the first year plus, all good. Sammy says, we Bostonians do have the best accent. I'm not going to pass judgment. I just love it. I think we've got the harsher Boston accent from the bailiff in this courtroom. We've got a bit of a softer accent from the judge. We get a sampling of all the different Massachusetts accents. It's very interesting. Happy at Heart said, I'm confused. Karen is distraught as if he's alive. Well, I think she knows he's dead and is freaking out. And the witness blows her a kiss. I have no judgment for the brother at all. It's curious, but this man has lost his sister, his sister's husband, his brother. He saw his brother in a horrific condition after that base of the skull fracture. He's got a niece and nephew that he's worried about. Is it odd? Yeah. And he kind of was like, yeah, I actually blew her a kiss. I feel like he also doesn't know how to, I don't know, man. I don't know. Distraught. Got woken up out of sleep by his mom saying something's happened to your brother. Distraught. Absolutely distraught. So I get it. All right, chat. We're going to get to more trial. I will give the best summary I can when I come back from lunch. We've got about 45 minutes for lunch and we will see. Yes, we will see. With all of that, thank you for being here. Thank you for being law nerds. For those of you that are new, if you want to keep up with my commentary and trial coverage, lawnerdapp.com will get you there. If you have questions about why I paused the stream, it's because they will always take breaks and we will get caught up. And some things I don't want to talk over. Some things I do. 3, do I always talk this much? Yes, I do. We're putting that on our bingo card because somebody in the chat will ask at least once a stream. Yep. Literally the key function of who I am as a human. Do I talk that much? Always. 4, we are law nerds. We are watching this as a jury. Thank you for figuring it out with us because, look, I saw this entire chat go, I'm sorry, what the fuck? And that only happens when you don't know what's coming. And we're going to see this trial all together. And finally, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you are inclined to. I've got a bet going with my 12-year-old. And I appreciate your help. All right, law nerds, I will see you back in about 45 minutes. I'm going to go get some lunch. You get some lunch. Bring some snackies for the afternoon. We're going to need them. I don't know how late court is going today, but tomorrow will be like a half day of court. So I imagine they're going to push it all the way to the end of the day today. I will see you soon. Bye.
You can stay up to date with everything I'm covering and fast notifications on our free iOS and Android app at lawnerdapp.com or search the App Store for Law Nerd. You can also follow me around social media. And don't forget to check out my podcast, The Emily Show, with quick bits dropping every Monday, summarizing everything I do here on the live streams on Tuesday and Thursday for when you just have time for the quick bits. Thanks for being a law nerd.